Go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Laisha Marsanishan, and I'm the Executive Director of the DCYF Oversight Board. It's great to see so many faces, and just want to share that I'm sorry I could not be there in person, but I will be in person at our next meeting. So I would just like to turn it over to our co-chair, who will be giving a welcome to some of our new board members. And I believe that's Senator Wilson.
Oh, I apologize. I just jumped on. Okay, we're on day whatever, 5 of session, and I'm already losing it. So, um, Diane, can you help me out while I get myself settled? And I am
If-
deeply appreciative of that. Thank you. I'm gonna get myself organized.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to have everybody here with us today. We're going to start our meeting by welcoming a new board member, April Messinger. Did I say your name right, April?
Messenger.
Messenger. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
April was appointed as a representative of an organization that advocates for the best interest of the child and works as a policy and advocacy manager at the Child Care Action Council. We also have a new legislative member in Senator Leonard Christian, who I believe is in person this morning. Is that correct? Yeah. Hello. Nice to see both of you. Senator Christian serves the 4th Legislative District of Spokane Valley. We're delighted to welcome you both to our Oversight Board and know that the board is eager to benefit from the background and expertise that you both bring. I don't know if either one of you have any comments that you want to. There's Senator Warnick. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. And I'm just jumping off to say thank you to all the people on this oversight board. I've really enjoyed working with you, and I am leaving it in good hands with all of you, and then with Senator Christian. I'll jump off so he can say, but I just want to say thank you for everything. You do good work. You really do. And I'll be watching, and if there's anything I can help with, I would sure be glad to. So thanks
Can
very much.
Can I jump in and just say, Senator Warnick, just thank you so much. And Senator Christian, it's not that I don't know you, and it's not that I don't know April either. It's like I can't open my agenda up, so I'm thinking, I don't know what's on the agenda yet. I just, Senator Warnick, just so deeply appreciate all of your work and behalf of children and families across the state, but especially rural communities and communities that are underserved in ways that oftentimes people don't think about. And Senator Warnick's work will continue in Human Services on the Senate, so she certainly is not gone. And I would also say Senator Christian sits now as my new ranking member on the Human Services Committee in the Senate, so also just deeply appreciative that he is sitting in the space and will be able to together kind of move this forward for the state. And then April and I will say, have known each other for ever and ever, and absolutely pleased to have her joining the board as well. So just thanks so much. And I see that Ruth Kagi has her hand up as well.
Well, I do. And Senator Warnick, you started this journey being on the Blue Ribbon Commission and forming the vision for the new department. And I have just so appreciated your continued engagement with this from day one. So thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks, Ruth.
And
like Senator Wilson said, I'm not going away. I'm just letting someone else enjoy this board. So thank you. Thanks very much.
And I'd like to add to the welcome to the 2 new members. It's wonderful to have you on board, and I wish you well, Senator Warnick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Ditto from all of us.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'll just keep going, Claire, until you tell me to stop. Okay. So the other people that we wanted to mention today is Barbara Serrano. She was our our representative from the governor's office, and she is also completing her work with our board. And I think we're waiting for a new appointee for that position. And then we really wish her well as well. And then we also wanted to congratulate our representative Tana Sen. I always feel like she's ours because she was on our board for many, many years. And boy, she's now moved on to the secretary of the DCYF. So we're really excited, and we're going to hear from her a little bit later. She's agreed to come on her day, whatever it is, 2 or 3 of her term, to come and speak with us, which we feel very lucky that we have her voice this morning. So with that, Lisha, is there anything else you wanted to add in terms of housekeeping before we move on, or roll
No,
call?
I think we covered our housekeeping items and can move into roll call. But again, just want to echo our appreciation for Senator Warnick and Barb Serrano, and really welcome our new members. We're thrilled that you're here. So I'm going to take roll call, and I'll do so alphabetically. So Katie Byron, I know she's absent. Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Thank you. Senator Leonard Christian.
Present.
Good morning. Representative Tom Dent. Absent. Dr. Ben DeHaan.
Present.
Good morning. Dr. Marion Harris.
Present.
Great. Welcome. Pamela Javier.
She's on her way.
Great. Thank you, Nicholas. Danielle Johnson.
Present.
Good morning. Ruth Kagi.
Present.
Welcome. Dr. Diane Levy.
Present.
Lois Martin. Okay. April Messenger.
Present.
Hi. And then Senator Claire Wilson. Wait.
Present. I really am here. I'm present.
Okay. Wonderful.
I also see, Lisha, I see both Pamela and Lois appear on my screen. So I think they're both here as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I have a smaller screen, so thank you for letting me know that. So I believe with that we are at quorum. And then I want to request the board consider approval of the November 14, 2024 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any edits or feedback on those minutes?
I would move to approve.
Wonderful. A second?
I'll second.
Great. Okay. All in favor say aye.
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 Wonderful. So with that, the minutes are approved. And, I am happy to say a little bit about our next presenter. So Patrick Dowd from the Office of Family and Child and Family Ombuds is going to be presenting today on their most recent annual report. And I'm just really thankful that he is coming and able to share some really important data with us. So Patrick, if you would like to share your screen or have Nicholas share his screen, just let us know.
I'm not hearing. I don't know if anyone else has the issue.
Not sure they've started yet, Bobby.
Well, I'm hearing little kind of ins and outs, so I'm thinking maybe it's not working. But anyway.
Yeah, I think he's still muted, so I'm
Okay.
How's this?
perfect.
All right. And can you see the slide presentation? All right, perfect. Hey, well, I got the technical issues out of the way.
Hooray.
Members of the DCYF Oversight Board, again, I'm Patrick Dowd. I'm Director of the Office of the Family and Children's Ombuds. And I thank you for the opportunity to present our 2024 annual report and discuss issues facing our child welfare system. And I'd also like to make this presentation as useful to you as possible. So at any point, if you have questions, feel free to just unmute and ask a question. That way, that'll save me from having to try to monitor the chat box with the slides as well. So I want to start with a quick overview of the Ombuds' duties and responsibilities. And these are set out in state law, RCW 4306A. And the primary duties are to respond to inquiries. So we provide information to individuals that may be involved with the child welfare system or have questions about, might be a foster parent or a parent wondering about their rights during a CPS investigation, for example, or a relative wanting information about what happens when a child enters care. So not everything we do is related to investigating an allegation of a complaint about the department. We're also a resource for information. With that said, the majority of our work does involve investigating complaints regarding allegations of actions or inactions by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, with the goal of ensuring that the department is adhering to state laws, policies, court orders, and also in areas where they have a wide swath of discretion, which is quite a few of the decisions they make, that they're exercising that discretion in a reasonable manner. The touchstone for our office, the law was creating our office was enacted in 1996, and the touchstone was about child safety. And I keep that in mind. That doesn't discount all of the other issues that we investigate and take actions on, such as relative placements, reunification, foster parents' rights, etc. But again, the reason that our office was created had to do with child safety, ensuring that the department was fulfilling its obligation to intervene to protect children from abuse and neglect. In addition to investigating complaints, we participate in each of the child fatality and near fatality reviews that are conducted. The department is required to facilitate an executive fatality review when the fatality was caused by child maltreatment and the family had been involved with the department in the preceding 12 months. Sometimes it can be a little bit unclear whether was the fatality or near fatality directly related to child maltreatment. And in those cases, our office kind of consults with the department to determine whether or not a fatality or near fatality review is required. Additionally, we publish an annual report that looks at the implementation of recommendations that were forthcoming from those reviews, as well as identifying systemic issues. And then later in my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the fatality and near fatality reviews directly related to the fentanyl crisis. And then finally, our office is charged with identifying systemic issues facing the child welfare system and making recommendations to the Oversight Board, to the Governor's Office, to legislators, to stakeholders on ways to strengthen families and ensure child safety. Well, before I move on, I wanted to touch on three kind of guiding principles for our work. The first is independence. We are situated under the Governor's Office. We're separated completely from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. That's obviously created so that to avoid any conflict of interest or perception of bias. Secondly, we conduct our work in an objective manner. We are not an advocate, and that can be frustrating for individuals that come to our office with a complaint. Rather, we have a very objective standard of review in assessing complaints. We look at, one, whether or not the alleged act occurred or not. If it did occur, then we're looking at whether or not the department's action or conduct was a violation of law, policy, or court order. And if we find that the department is following court orders, following state law, then we will not take further action on a complaint. And that can be frustrating for kind of individuals that think we're going to be their advocate. We're going to kind of represent their interest against the department, but that's not our role. Similarly, when we work with the legislature and stakeholders on even proposed legislation, we almost always sign in as testifying as other. We will provide information about the strengths, the benefits, maybe areas of concern for proposed legislation, but we try to maintain that objectivity and neutrality in the work that we do. And then finally is confidentiality. Individuals that come to our office with a complaint, we by state law are required to maintain their confidentiality. The department knows that. They never even ask, well, did the grandmother complain or is the foster parent filing this complaint? They understand that the focus is not on the person that contacted our office with an issue, but rather our focus is on the actions or inaction of the department. Similarly, we have full access to the department's case records. We interview supervisors, caseworkers, et cetera. We are required to maintain the confidentiality of those records. An interesting exception to that is we can share information directly with members or with the Oversight Board as a whole. If that situation arises, then the board members would also be subject to that same duty to maintain the confidentiality of that information. All right, so what I'd like to focus on in my presentation are, one, talk about the complaint issues, the type of complaints that we receive, what are the issues that are brought to our attention, as well as situations where we make adverse findings against the department, where we find that the department has violated law or policy, and how we follow up with the department to ensure that corrective action is taken in those situations. And then I also want to talk about three systemic issues. One, placement exceptions that our office has been unfortunately reporting on for the last 10 years. And while there's been some improvement, it still has not been completely resolved. I also want to spend some time talking about juvenile rehabilitation. I think you're all familiar with the challenges that are facing JR, as well as talking about what specifically is OFCO's role as far as oversight of juvenile rehabilitation facilities. And then again, I want to talk a little bit about child fatalities and near fatalities, and more specifically, the impact of the fentanyl crisis, as well as I think there's some debate on whether or not the Keeping Families Together Act has had an impact on an increase in critical incidents of children. Okay, so this slide talks about complaint issues that we've received in the last year. Actually, and this slide shows over the last 5 years. In our last reporting year, and a reporting year runs from September 1st through August 31st, and that provides us time to pull our data together and publish our annual report in November. So again, so when I talk about 2024, that is not the calendar year. It's running from September through the end of August. The main takeaways from this slide are the most common complaint that our office receives is in regard to agency conduct. And that includes unwarranted or unreasonable or inadequate CPS investigations. It would include unprofessional conduct by caseworkers and staff. That could include a parent or foster parent that feels that the caseworker has been dishonest or is discriminatory or is harassing them. It would also include dishonesty, information in a report filed by the department is inaccurate, communication failures, caseworkers not returning calls, not notifying parents or relatives regarding a case, and also situations where the department has breached confidentiality. So those are kind of some examples of the type of complaints that fall under that category of agency conduct. And historically, that has been kind of the largest number of complaints that we've received. As I'm sure you know, over the last 4 or 5 years, the department has significantly reduced the number of children entering care. And that's reflected in the drop in complaints that we've received regarding family separation and reunification. Before 2021, that was kind of right up there, kind of neck and neck with agency conduct as far as the issues aggrieved to our office, and that has really decreased. Family separation and reunification includes, however, more than just the unnecessary removal of a child from a parent. It would also include a complaint regarding a parent not receiving court-ordered visits. It would include a complaint alleging that the department is not placing a child with an available relative. And it would also include failure to reunite with a parent when the parent has addressed the parental deficiencies that led to the child coming into care. A positive note is the kind of the lime green line represents child safety complaints. And kind of a takeaway here is, and I want to kind of reference again the Keeping Families Together Act and concerns that implementation of the change in the legal standard for removing a child and creating more of an emphasis on working with families and keeping children in the home. That was implemented in 2023. I'm not saying this number is dispositive or we can draw definitive conclusions, but I think it's worth noting that we have not seen an increase in complaints regarding child safety following the implementation of the Keeping Families Together Act. In fact, it's decreased slightly from 2023 to 2024. The dark line regarding dependent child health, well-being, and permanency, that historically has always stayed at that level of about 10% of the complaints that we receive. And other issues is it just kind of a catch-all category where this complaint issue doesn't really fit in any of the other categories that we have. And that could be, lack of support services for a foster parent or a caregiver, foster care licensing issues, delay or denial of a foster parent's an application for a foster care license. So again, that's kind of a catch-all category. Before I move on, I want to give a little overview of who complains to our office. And the majority of the complaints we receive, about 53%, are from parents. And I think that is no surprise. And a parent that is subject to a CPS investigation or a FAR intervention. It could be parents that are separated, and one parent being concerned that CPS is not investigating reports of child maltreatment that person has made against the other parent. Because parents are involved at so many different stages of CPS intervention or DCYF involvement, I think it's understandable that that's where most of the complaints we receive are from. The next category, 21%, are from relatives. And again, they're the ones that also have eyes and ears on the children. They're the ones that when a child enters care are often very interested in being a placement resource. And then the next category, we get about 10% of our complaints are from foster parents, and then another 10% from community professionals. I want to talk a little bit about race and ethnicity of individuals that contact our office. And we track this in a couple of different ways. We do request information that the individual submitting a complaint identify their race and ethnicity. And we look at that information to determine, is this reflective of the families that are engaged with the child welfare system? And then we also look at the race and ethnicity of the child that is the subject of the complaint, because there could be two different things. So, for example, the race and ethnicity of a school teacher that contacts our office with a complaint may be very different from the race and ethnicity of the child. So we're looking at that from, I guess, a couple different perspectives. And in general, we found that the complaints that we receive reflect the children in the race and ethnicity of the children and families that are involved with the child welfare system. We have found that, there have been some kind of discrepancies. So, for example, we found that the complaints that we received were regarding Native American, American Indian children is lower than those families and children's involvement with the child welfare system. So this last year, we've done outreach with tribal child welfare offices throughout the state to make sure they are informed about our office, what we can do, and how we can help families, and how those families can contact our office for assistance. So, okay, after we get a complaint, I quickly went over our standard of review. Again, we're looking at, did the alleged act occur? And if it did, was the department's action or conduct consistent or a violation of law, policy, or court order? And in about 65% of our complaints, we find either that the alleged conduct did not occur, and or that the department's action is complying with law, policy, or court order. So that might be a parent complaining that a CPS worker interviewed their child at school. That was a violation of their constitutional rights because CPS did not obtain the parent's consent and permission prior to interviewing their child. Completely understand the parent's perspective on that, but state law does allow CPS to interview a child outside of the parent's presence and without first obtaining parental consent when they're doing a CPS investigation. So that would be an example where we are determining that no, the department's action is complying with law, policy, or court order. In about 14% of our complaints, we're monitoring to ensure resolution. So as you can imagine, these complaints are usually very fluid, and it's an ongoing case with the department. It might be a relative that's complaining, why is my grandchild in foster care? I contacted the department. I'm available. Why aren't they placing with me? Well, we might look into that and see whether the department is doing their due diligence. They're pursuing placement. They're, doing a background check, whatever it might be. This is moving along, but we're going to monitor this to make sure that it stays on track. Other cases where we will intervene, and this is kind of a step up from a monitoring, and it's like, okay, this is really kind of heading off track. I'll go back to my example with the relative, and we're saying this is an out-of-state relative, and they haven't submitted the request for a ICPC home study with the other state to complete a home study of this relative. So we might go up the chain with the department, contact an area administrator and say, what's the delay with ICPC? And to make sure that the department follows through with their legal obligation. There are situations where we'll get a complaint, and while we're involved, it will be resolved by the department. And the complainant often says, I don't know what you did, but thank you very much. This is fixed. And we think, well, we really didn't do anything yet, but we're glad that it's been resolved. And then sometimes we'll get complaints that are outside of our jurisdiction. So that might be a complaint about a judge or a commissioner, or the actions of an attorney general or a parent's attorney. It might be a family law matter, et cetera, that are outside of our scope of review. When we get those complaints, we try to provide a resource, if one is available, to that would be able to assist the complainant. So this slide talks about adverse findings. And so I just kind of described how we investigate complaints, the outcomes of those complaints. And adverse findings are when, okay, this is not just a run-of-the-mill complaint issue, but this is a more serious violation of law or policy. And we have a process where we will kind of notify the department. And this is a complaint issue that we will elevate to headquarters level. So in this past year, our letter with a written adverse finding, that would go to Secretary Ross Hunter. It would go to Natalie Green, Doreen Perez, the upper kind of headquarters staff. It would go to the regional administrator as well as the area administrator. So we are bringing this issue to their attention, and we do so only when, one, the department's action is a violation of law or policy, and two, it is harmful to an individual, family, or child, or has the potential for harm. So we don't do this when we don't make technical findings. That's not why our office was established. So we are not going through the department's practices and procedures manual with a fine-tuned comb looking for insignificant violations of policy. But there are situations where we think this is really significant and the secretary really needs to be aware of this issue. So we send them a
Patrick,
letter.
can I
Yes.
interrupt you for just a
Yeah.
second? Because Lois has her hand up and just to see what she has to say before you go on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diane, and thank you, Patrick, for your service. I have a question for you regarding one of the things you did not mention is any complaints regarding implicit bias or racism in from caseworkers or social workers. Was curious if you've had any of those, and if so, how did you handle them? And if not, if you did, how would the department resolve the complaint?
Louis, thank you. That's a great question. We do get complaints alleging bias, discrimination, and retaliation. And we have a structure for evaluating and assessing those complaints. And the challenge that we found, and it involves one looking at did the alleged kind of act occur, and if so, what was the underlying motivation? And that is the piece that is very difficult to kind of ascertain. To be honest with you, whether it's an allegation of bias, retaliation, or discrimination, it's very often there is also I guess, a more objective rationale for the department's action. So that it might be a complaint from a foster parent saying, I was complaining about the department, lack of services for this child in my care. These services are court ordered. There's been delay. And I was going up the chain with the department with that concern. And now I find out there's a licensing violation investigation against me. And I think this was retaliatory. So the struggle that we sometimes encounter is that might be true. The referral might have been driven by the foster parent complaining to the department about services for the child, but there could also be a underlying issue regarding a licensing concern within that foster home that would justify the licensing investigation. Similarly, a parent complaining that the department is delaying in reunification and it's based on discrimination or bias. That might be accurate. The department might, on the other hand, say, well, the parent has kind of recently relapsed or had a positive UA or these other factors that are delaying reunification. So I just bring that up that for 2 points. One is we do have a kind of a criteria for investigating those concerns. Two, it's very difficult to substantiate them. Whether or not we're able to substantiate them, when we see a pattern of conduct, we will generally elevate that to the worker's supervisor or the area administrator and even say, look, we can't conclusively substantiate this allegation, but we find it's a concern. And our office does not have the authority to take disciplinary action or corrective action with caseworkers. That's within the department's purview. But what we can do is, again, elevate that concern when we think that there is some, credibility to that allegation. Is that helpful, Lois?
It is, thank you. And I'm just it would be interesting as a follow-up to see, I'm just curious what percentage of those other complaints are in that category, as well as how many have been elevated just in the feedback loop, if that's something that you can provide.
Okay. No, that's good. And again, just off the top of my head, again, to be honest with you, Lois, I will say that um, that it's rare that we're able to substantiate it and like send a written finding to the department that the department discriminated against this person or retaliated. Um, and well, I'll just kind of leave it at that. um, Senator Wilson?
Yeah, I just had a question. We have a new Office of Equity that's really working cross-agency, and just curious whether any of the work happening that is flowing out into agency perhaps has impacted some of the things you're talking about and some of the questions that Lois is having as far as how the state is really trying to figure out how it is that we dig deeper into our equity goals and look at the disproportionality that exists not only we know within child welfare and the systems, but in many other spaces as well. Just wondering, has the office been impacted by any of the work of the equity office? Thanks.
That's a great question, and I think this is my kind of personal view. I'm not speaking for the department. I think the department and the Office of Equity have done a great job on kind of the high level overview about disproportionality and bias within the system. To Lois's point, I don't think we do as good a job on the granular level as far as a supervisor's or caseworker's individual interaction with the families on their caseload. And that's where those interactions are what drive the complaints to our office. And again, I think kind of the big overview and the numbers and how many families or what's the population of children in out-of-home care, all that. Yeah, we're great at describing disproportionality in that way, but it's the person-to-person interactions and decisions that I think need a lot of attention and work. And I just made a note to follow up with the Office of Equity kind of on that. And I'd like to talk to them about this is our structure for responding to these complaints and how can we do this better?
Thanks.
Patrick, I'm gonna just two things. One is time check. We have you until 2:25, so just get that. Right. And then the other thing is, I just want to mention that in your adverse findings, you mentioned child safety had not really risen in number of complaints, but I want to appreciate the fact that child safety is one of the top adverse findings that you have. And when I look at the table from your report, it looks like it's basically doubled from 2022. So I don't know that we can completely rule out child safety as a concern if the majority or the higher percentage of the actual complaints is being found to be adverse. Does that make sense, or am I reading it wrong?
No, it does. That's a good point. I think the main takeaway is that because we reserve adverse findings for serious violations that impact the rights of parents and the safety and welfare of a child, those complaints regarding child safety will kind of elevate more frequently to adverse findings than other issues. And the child safety category would include like failure to conduct health and safety visits. It would include like failure to complete a safety assessment, failure to complete a initial face-to-face with the child at the beginning of a CPS investigation. As far as parents' rights, that might be delays in completing a CPS investigation, or breach of confidentiality, or notifying a parent regarding a CPS investigation.
Thank you. That helps. So it's
Okay.
not directly child safety, but it can be a wide umbrella of things that fall under that.
Correct.
Ruth, I see you have your hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diane. Patrick, I'm wondering, I know one of your later charts talks about, well, about the issue of fentanyl. And I'm hoping we're going to have time to deal with some of the content of the conclusions that you reached based on the reviews that you
Okay.
did.
Why don't we just jump ahead to that? Okay, so we've obviously seen, again, these next two slides deal with critical incidents, child fatalities, near fatalities involving fentanyl. And along with the fentanyl crisis in our kind of nationwide, certainly in our communities, we've seen a significant jump in these critical incidents. This slide includes all fatalities and near fatalities regarding all children. So that would include a 16-year-old that is using fentanyl and accidentally overdoses. It would include a suicide attempt. It would include a toddler finding foil or fentanyl on the floor and accidentally kind of ingesting it.
Hey, Patrick.
If there is a positive here, it is that the near fatalities, there's been a much larger increase in near fatalities than in fatalities. And I think
Patrick, I think Senator Christian has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just kind of curious, if somebody's in JR and who's over 18 and they pass away, fentanyl or other, are they considered a child at that point for your purposes or others?
I'll double check, but I don't think they would be included. So,
okay, thanks.
Child fatalities here are 0 to age 18.
Okay.
So and I think the reason why we see so many more near fatalities is the availability of naloxone and department's kind of distribution of medications and kits to prevent overdoses.
Patrick, can I ask a question? I guess a response
Yes.
to Senator Christian, and I think I'm wondering if the reason that you're only collecting data for individuals up to the age of 18 is because currently under the purview of OVCO or the office that it only goes to 18. It does not include our emerging adults or the extended 18 to 25-year-old, which is that correct? Why that's not inclusive? Because statutorily, even though JR is under DCYF, it is not within your purview at this time.
That's correct. And I'll be talking about that on Monday, Senator Wilson, for Senate Bill 5032. And thank you. There's another piece to this is like, if there is an allegation of abuse or neglect at a JR facility, the licensing division will investigate that. But if it's, say, for example, a assault of a 18 to 25-year-old by staff, even if it's substantiated, licensing division would not classify that as a founded for child abuse because the victim is not legally a child under Washington state law. So there's that kind of piece to it as well.
Pamela, I see you with your hand raised.
Hi, yes. So I had just a question. I wanted some clarification on these child fatalities and near fatalities involving fentanyl. Are these children that are like in the child welfare system, or is that children in general in the system and as well at home with their families?
So this is regarding children that have been involved with the department within the preceding 12 months, as well as if the critical incident resulted in a report to CPS. So it is not the full kind of world of child fatalities and near fatalities in our community. It's rather a subsection, again, of cases that are reported to CPS and families that were previously involved with the department.
Patrick, we have extended your time to about 9:30, 9:35. Just want to make sure you get a chance to touch on the JR piece as well. Thank you.
Okay. So this slide breaks down the fatalities and near fatalities to the subset of those involving the ingestion of fentanyl. These are children, younger children, ages 0 to 11, accidental ingestion. And this is an area where we've really seen a significant increase. I can say kind of this is anecdotal. Our office participates in all of the fatality and near fatalities. We regularly review this type of situation. In speaking to the Keeping Families Together Act, I can say that these reviews have not identified a systemic issue where we're just seeing case after case where, wow, the department would have had an opportunity to remove the child, but for the change in state law that occurred in 2023. That's really not what we see. We see rather the department had a family assessment response case open 8 months ago, and the family was involved in services, and there was no imminent risk of harm, whether it's physical or other harm, that would have been a basis for removal. And then the case is closed, and then the critical incident occurs. I don't want to discount stakeholders that have a concern and wonder if, like, has the pendulum swung too far in one direction, and is that putting children at risk? I think that's a reasonable question, but I don't think we have enough information to affirmatively say, yes, the standard of removal that was established in 2023 is the problem. I think we need more information. And so I don't think we're at that point of drawing that conclusion. I do
Can
want
I ask
to,
just real,
yes.
can I, before you go to JR, just real quickly, do you ever look at the workers' caseload and how that might impact the child fentanyl near fatalities and fatalities? Has that been a part of what you've looked at?
Yes, that is a common issue discussed in all of the critical incident reviews related to substance abuse or drugs and related to neglect or physical abuse. In those cases, very often, caseworkers talk about high caseloads, offices being understaffed, and it's not always we had open vacancies, but sometimes it is a caseworker was on leave, a caseworker was at a training, and the office didn't have the capacity to kind of meet those those situations. So that is a common concern that is raised in those reviews. So as far as juvenile rehabilitation, this past year, we've received an influx of complaints about youth at JR and specifically at Green Hill School. Everybody's, I think, pretty aware of those issues: overcrowding, understaffed. That leads to youth being confined in their rooms. That leads to unsanitary living conditions, which leads to they're not receiving the programming that they should be, and which can lead to safety risks within the facility as well. OFCO, as I mentioned, we were created in 1996. At that time, then Children's Administration and DSHS were separate from juvenile rehabilitation. Our enacting statute did not provide us with authority to investigate JR, and there was never any kind of implication that there would be the need to do so. So who does investigate JR? Well, I mentioned again that the licensing division of DCYF, which primarily is responsible for monitoring foster care, licensed foster homes, that entity will investigate allegations of abuse or neglect of a child at a JR facility. The JR facilities are not licensed, so it's not like the licensing division can take corrective action with Green Hill. Rather, when they find what would be a licensing violation or an issue, they report that to the superintendent, and then it's within the purview of the superintendent to take further action. So there's a disconnect there. JR has some internal review procedures which I think are inadequate. There is a critical incident review team that responds to use of force incidents, a youth overdosing, etc. There is a informal resolution process that is encouraged where a youth would be advised to contact a supervisor at Green Hill or Echo Glen and try to work out any problem they might have. They also have a written complaint process. What I've heard from youth and parents is that this is completely inadequate because the youth is relying on the individuals that they have a grievance against to address their grievance. And at the very least, that should be elevated to a headquarters level. This year, the DCYF submitted a decision package to create a formal, both a hearing process to address disciplinary actions and placement actions, as well as a formal grievance process within the JR to address other issues. My understanding is that Governor Inslee's proposed budget did not include funding for that process. And personally, I think that is a very needed improvement within the structure of JR to, again, provide a hearing process for disciplinary actions and a grievance procedure within JR. And then secondly, I think it's important to modify or define what is OFCO's role. And I've been fortunate in that the previous administration under Secretary Ross Hunter was very supportive of OFCO investigating complaints regarding JR. And as a result, DCYF and JR staff have been very cooperative with our efforts to investigate. But we do not have, by statute, we don't have access to JR's case management system, for example. And I think it would be preferable to have our role defined in statute rather than be based on the beliefs and maybe whims of a secretary that, may change within DCYF. So, and as I mentioned, there's Senate Bill 5032. Now there's a hearing on Monday on that bill that would do just that and modify OFCO's authority. I did submit information for a fiscal note for 2 additional FTEs to handle that additional workload as well. So with that, I'm open to kind of any comments, questions that you might have. I passed over placement exceptions. The good news is they're dropping significantly, and I've looked at where we're at over the last 4 months, and they've continued to drop. So that's encouraging.
Ruth.
Thank you. Well, that's exactly what I was going to comment on. I think it's important to look at those two slides because it's such a dramatic reduction and it's an issue that your reports have really focused on in past years. And I think it's the department really should be complimented on the tremendous work they've done to try to decrease placement exceptions.
It's not just a decrease in placement exceptions. It's also where those placement exceptions are occurring. And we've gone from several years ago when they were at DCYF offices with youth sleeping on the floor in the lobbies. We've eliminated that. We've drastically reduced the reliance on hotels, which are also extremely can be traumatic for youth and at the very least unstable, as well as decreasing the number of night-to-night placements. There's been an increase in the use of lease facilities. There are 3 lease facilities, one in Burien, which is the previous kind of the Ruth Dykeman Center, which is more of a kind of an institutional or congregate setting. And then there are 2 other family home style leased facilities, one in Chehalis and one in Vancouver. I visited those facilities. They have dedicated staff that are very committed to working with these youth. So it is a significant improvement. I think the challenge for the department is, what do we do with these leased facilities? I don't think it is a long-term solution. I don't think the department wants to be in the business of managing these facilities. And our recommendation, OFCA's annual report recommendation, was to increase the number of kind of receiving homes that ultimately I think should replace the leased facilities.
There's a comment in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Patrick, but it's from Danielle saying that the Lake Burien site is currently closed due to lack of staff.
Okay.
Pamela?
Yeah, Patrick, so these DCYF lease facilities, I never heard of it, but is it similar to as if like a group home or what do these DCYF lease facilities look like, and are the youth's needs met when they're in that type of facility, and who's running it?
So the lease facilities have kind of evolved. When they were first established, they were kind of after hours staff, and it was kind of different staff people kind of rotating through. There was a lack of continuity. And they've greatly improved that. There is an individual at the headquarters level, that Beth Kutsera, who manages the lease facilities, and they have dedicated staff. So it's the same staff people that are working kind of with the youth. The Centralia, Aspire House in Centralia and Belonging House in Vancouver are more of they're in residential communities. They just look like any other house in that community. But again, these are temporary placements. So I would not say this is just like a relative placement, or this is just like a foster home that is able to meet the specific needs of the child. These children or youth are largely there because the department has not identified a specific placement that is situated to meet the child's needs. So I want to underscore that it is still temporary. It is not a long-term placement for the youth. But it is a significant improvement of how we were handling these placement exceptions in the past.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I think we're going to actually move on. We really appreciate your coming and squeezing in as much as you did this morning. I know we made you kind of go through a lot of information, and we really appreciate the report that you've allowed us to access to. because that I think has a lot more information for all of the board members who maybe didn't get a chance to ask questions this morning. Thank you.
Can I just say also, Diane, that, you know, during this legislative session, you're going to see quite a bit of focus on things happening with this within the system, as well as unaccompanied minors and also JRA, and would love, as we think forward at an upcoming meeting further along in session or after session, to be able to come back and have DCYF report on kind of where they're now sitting and the future work they're going to need to be doing based on the input and the information that has been gathered in the legislation, because I think you'll see hopefully support and work happening in the spaces. Thanks. Lisha, are you moving us on, or are we moving ourselves on to Jenny? And I see Jenny here.
I am happy to introduce Jenny. And again, thank you so much, Director Dowd.
Thank you, everyone.
So next we have Jenny Hedden. She is Deputy Director and Chief of Staff from DCYF, and she's here to present on two topics: DCYF outcomes and reviews of DCYF's 2025 focused priorities. So Jenny, thank you so much for coming today, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. And thank you to the Oversight Board for having us. I actually always kind of love going after Patrick. He provides such great information for us. And actually, I think you'll see some connection between some of the items that he was mentioning and some of the priorities and goals that we have as an agency. So I know we gave Patrick a little bit more time, so I'll move quickly. But of course, please stop me for any questions that you might have, and we'll get moving. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our work that we've been doing inside of DCYF around priorities and goals. And also want to acknowledge that we're in the middle of a huge transition for the agency. And I know you'll be hearing from our new secretary later in the agenda today. So obviously this is going to be a thing that is in flux for us, and is we want to keep it alive and responsive to things that are going on in the external world. So wanted to start off just by seating us in our DCYF Strategic and Racial Equity Plan. There is actually a link at the bottom of this, but you can find it on our website. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but if you are not, we're happy. I'll drop that link into the chat as well after we conclude here. And we really have kind of three sections laid out in our agency, this Strategic and Racial Equity Plan. The top line is this equity focus and outcome, which is around eliminating racial disproportionalities and advancing racial equity. And that's a through line for all of the things that come below. So that's why it's listed there at the top. We then sort of break out some of our outcomes in a difference between, we called it intention and capacity. So intention is, these are the things we actually want to accomplish, and capacity is the how. So I sort of think about intention is what, capacity is how. And we have in safely reducing the number / rate of children in out-of-home care by half, create successful transitions into adulthood for youth and young adults in our care, creating a high-quality integrated birth-to-8 system, improve quality and intention of our practice is in that capacity component, and improve quality and availability of our provider services. So one of the things that we ran into as we started to really try to bring this strategic plan to life is that you can see some of these things have sort of numerical targets and goals, and some do not. And so we went through an effort to really create goals around some of the ones that needed maybe a little bit more clarity. So we can go to the next slide. So again, keeping equity at the top and centered there, we have really focused in on that intention side. And we've added a goal, an agency goal around prevention, because we recognized that in the ones that we had previously, there really wasn't a focus on our preventative work. And this is an area that the agency would like to grow in. So you see us safely reducing the need for child abuse and neglect intakes by 18%, and safely reducing entries and reentries into child welfare and juvenile rehabilitation by 40%. So this is trying to get upstream or after engagement with the system to make sure that we're not seeing families come back in. And it kind of connects to the next one you see there, which is We already had a great goal, which was safely reducing the number/rate of children in out-of-home care by 50%. And I will say that we are pretty close to actually having met that goal. And right now, I think we're having the conversations, great, I think dovetail to Patrick's presentation. Really, what is a safe level that we should maintain in terms of the number of children in out-of-home care, and how do we do that and balance safety with the harm, we know the harm of removal, right? And so that is going to be the needle we are constantly trying to thread here in the child welfare system. Then we have 3 goals that we've written out for our outcome around successful transitions into adulthoods, just adding more specificity. So ensuring that youth exiting DCYF systems graduate from high school at the same rate of all Washington youth. So think about this from disproportionality in a different way, which is we don't want youth that have gone through our systems to have a disproportionate experience when it comes to high school graduation. We recognize that's a real foundational starting point for youth to be successful in their life moving forward. We also have ensuring youth exiting DCYF systems are employed and or enrolled in post-secondary at the same rate of, as all Washington youth. Our employment numbers are pretty good. Our post-secondary involvement, we could definitely do some work on. And so I'm happy on any of these to come back at a future meeting and show some of the data that we are collecting related to these goals. Lastly, we also have a reduced by half the number of youth who experience homelessness within 1 year of exiting a DCYF system. We have a charge to actually make this 0. And we recognize that affordable housing and housing availability is such a challenge in Washington state right now that we felt it was more reasonable that we would have a goal around reducing this, cutting this in half. And so we recognize that we're charged with 0 and we are wanting to make some efforts to reduce that over time, and excited for our new incoming governor as a focus on affordable housing. And we'll be curious to see how that impacts this goal. Lastly, in the high quality integrated birth to 8 system, we have gone back to our 80% of Washington children are ready for kindergarten, and also have high quality early learning available and affordable to all in Washington. And we have some definitions of what that actually means. So these are some of the agency goals that we are working on. Our strategic plan is about ready to need to be redone. It was a 5-year strategic plan. And so watch for more information about how we want to engage with stakeholders and impacted parties across the state, internal staff, external folks as well, as we redo that strategic plan for the next 5 years. We can go to the next slide. So just a tiny bit about what we've been doing around priorities. I kind of say if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And I think that can be the challenge for an agency that's tasked with responding to such a huge amount of need in Washington state. And so what we've really been trying to do in the last 2 years is create a more targeted, focused list of things, especially that we are working on at our leadership level in the agency. So in calendar year 2024, we created sort of our first list of agency priorities. They were mainly an internal exercise, kind of focusing on how do we have our leaders work on particular things, what is going to actually be different and be accomplished in a 1-year period. And as we enter calendar year 2025, we have draft priorities, and the goal was to make some incremental progress on these priorities. So we really want to make sure we're starting to tether them to those agency outcomes and goals that I talked about earlier, and also make them SMART goals. So if you're not sort of familiar with that, that acronym is a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So really, like, how do we actually, we want to say these are time bound. These are things that we can do in 12 months. They're very specific. We can measure them, and so that's some of the focus we had. And we are going to be rolling those out in the coming month. And obviously, we have a new secretary joining us, so we want to make sure that she has an opportunity to put her fingerprint on these priorities as they move forward. So we can go to the next slide. What I'm going to show, because they're sort of in draft state for 2025, is really just some examples of how this played out, and can give a tiny update on where we had some successes. Again, I think you'll see items that Patrick talked about in here as things that we were trying to focus on. So in the early learning area in 2024, we completed models for the cost of quality. And this sounds like a very sort of bureaucratic thing, but this was really our ability to say, what would it actually cost? What do we need to pay in terms of rates for childcare to get to that quality of care that we want? And we were able to finally produce sort of models of what that looks like in 2024. We also had a focus on increasing the number of families using ECAP and subsidized childcare in high need communities. And I see a hand raised, so happy to take that question.
All right, thank you very much. This is Lois Martin. I have a question about the cost of quality care study. And I would like to know why or what the rationale was also including the work around families not paying more than 7% of their income toward childcare. It seems like those are two separate issues. How much parents pay should definitely be discussed, but I am concerned that that is going to increase the fiscal note so high that will make it pretty much impossible to be able to come up with a solution for the workforce. So can you share why those two were coupled together? And is the plan to run them as one funding request or to separate them out?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. You're right? This has two sort of components to it. One is that how much does it cost to actually provide, and what should parents pay? And I think this has always been a dynamic tension in childcare, right? We want to make sure we're compensating adequately, and that drives challenges in affordability that we need to address. We have information related to both components, so they could potentially be taken sort of separately. But I'm also going to maybe ask, I know Allison hasn't joined us as a presenter yet, but she may also want to address this, especially in light of the next topic we'll have after I finish here, which is really about the current economic environment, our decision packages, and what we're being asked in terms of scaling down. So I really appreciate the question and happy to have more conversation about the childcare and affordability and quality, holding those two things in tension with each other. In 2025, we are looking really at developing that implementation plan for that expanded access to affordable childcare. So that's where we start to get into 7% of a person's income being used on childcare. And so really thinking about that. And then we went further. So some of what we experimented with last year was like, well, how much can we actually get done in 12 months? And so you'll see some of our priorities continue on into 2025 because we didn't get as far as we'd like. And we also got more specific about what we actually wanted to do. So in 2025, we're really having a focus on, we would like to invest in family outreach and recruitment for ECAP and subsidized childcare. So you're really increasing the awareness of the programs, but not necessarily changing who's eligible for the programs. But we know there's areas of the state that would really benefit. There are people that are eligible for these programs that are not using them at the same rate. And we want to make sure that we are really doing targeted outreach in those communities. We can go to the next slide. Child welfare. And this is sort of starting to encompass also some of our prevention services. So in 2024, really focused on fully implementing and supporting changes into the Indian child welfare. So you know that there was significant court cases in Indian child welfare, along with some changes to the underlying law. And so we have really focused on doing a significant effort with tribes to negotiate what our changes in policy would be to fully implement those court cases. And then that resulted in significant changes to our Indian child welfare policy, and we began rolling those out in 2024. We intend to continue that rollout and training into 2025 for Indian child welfare. And you heard and saw in the data a focus on the ending of hotel stays. And one of the areas that we had in 2024 was really improving practice related to youth at risk of hotel stays. So we completed in-depth case reviews of all youth that had been in hotels and implemented recommendations. And I believe that work on practice improvement, we obviously added some resources in terms of additional placement opportunities and options, But that practice work was really what I believe drove down that use of hotel stays and placements, exceptions to placement. And our staff deserve a huge credit for doing that work. That was not easy to implement, and it is resulting in much better outcomes for young people. And then in 2025, you can see that we would like to expand our investments in safely preventing that removal of children. And this is also about beginning to potentially claim for what's noted here is FFPSA, that stands for Family First Prevention Services Act. It was federal law that was passed many years ago that does allow you to claim for federal resources to help prevent removal, whereas previously you could only really claim federal resources under Title 48 once a child had been removed and placed in out-of-home care. So we are working on that, and I believe you actually have planned for a future agenda, a deeper dive on the work that we have in FFPSA. And then to dovetail, obviously, the conversation you had with Patrick earlier, we are doing these child fatality and near fatality reviews. And one of the big things that we're implementing in 2025 is looking very specifically, continuing to look at system improvements and then implementing those recommendations. So where did the system not respond well that led to a fatality or near fatality? And as an example of this, for example, and I think we heard about this, we know handoffs in a case are a place where there is risk. A social worker goes on leave. A social worker leaves the job. CPS to child family services worker, right? Those handoffs are a place where we would want to make some recommendations for system improvements and then actually implement those recommendations. And I think there's a lot to learn from many other systems that do this well and recognize those handoff points as being critical in the case. So that will be an area that we'll be focusing on in 2025. We can go to the next slide. Licensing, huge year for licensing in 2024. We completed new rules for group care, which sounds, again, very bureaucratic, but really this was about us going into looking at group homes and wanting to make the rules that govern those group homes more responsive and more developmentally appropriate. So just as a, again, tiny example, and I see there's a question, so we could take that here in a second. We are hearing a lot from youth that one of the challenges around going to a group home was that they had to give up their cell phone. And as many of us know, I mean, myself included, my cell phone is my lifeline, and I'm not even a youth that has experienced, significant moves and trauma. And those youth want to be able to maintain that. And we had conversations and did what's called negotiated rulemaking to make sure that those group care rules were more responsive to the needs of youth while making sure that providers can actually provide that care. And I'll pause.
I'm sorry, this is Bobby. Are you calling on me? I hope.
Yes, sorry.
Thanks. I'm sorry I'm a little slow on the uptake. I wanted to go back to the child welfare piece.
So.
But on the particular side of the 2025 priorities to expand investments for safe renewal. There's a relatively new law, as in just taking effect on, or I guess it became law on January 4th of this year, which is called the Supporting America's Children and Families Act. And I'm just learning a bit about it myself, but it's a bunch of money, and it was a bipartisan piece of legislation that talks about enabling, for the first time, states will be able to use federal child welfare dollars to give funds to families experiencing an economic emergency. And it goes on to say, in order to prevent them from being separated, particularly where the primary issue seems to be neglect. And then also a big hunk of change for mental health services for children that are in foster care, but also easing transition and for parents who are creating a new where child welfare policy where there's been mental health issues within the family, to also use that to provide that money to provide services such that it could avoid placement. Maybe this is for Allison, and I don't mean at all to send you a curveball, but I think this is where it comes in. And the question is, do we have any sense about the impact that this might have on us?
That's a great question. I will definitely, we'll punt to Allison, although it sounds like this is at the federal level. We can definitely.
It is, but it's right. Impact. The money is all coming to states.
Certainly. Yes. So let us do a little bit more research and definitely can provide response. And that might be something we could actually roll into our FFPSA presentation.
Yeah, I think so. The legislature might be happy to hear that the feds may well be helpful in this regard.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, Jenny. I just want to jump in real fast. So Allison is waiting to enter, and unfortunately, I'm unable to promote her. So since the screen is being shared, we will find a way to get her in, but she is waiting. So I wanted to let you know that.
That's great. And I know she's listening, so I'm sure she'll be able to address some of this in her section, but I see a couple more hands up.
Nicholas, does someone in the, is that Senator Christian or someone who has a question?
Yes, Senator Christian.
All right, and then I see Pamela after that.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Just kind of curious, has there been any engagement with youth in these other homes? I can understand the concern of their cell phone being, removed, but has there been any conversation about a time frame so that, say, after 10 o'clock to 7 in the morning, the cell phone is, confiscated for other word, I guess, to allow that student or, that child to have a proper sleep time, but yet not lose contact with their world? And is there some kind of a compromise in there that we could be looking at versus just one way, the other?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. It's a good question. I had teens in my home and definitely understand the challenge. So this was not like blanket, you must have access to your cell phone 24/7. This was being really clear in our administrative rules, but also just in work with our provider community that it should be a much more individualized approach. So there may be situations and times where a youth was not being appropriate with their cell phone, or we are worried, for example, around commercial sexual exploitation for a youth, and that youth may not have access to a phone to try to mitigate those risk factors. And certainly community foster homes as well as kin placements can certainly have rules that are appropriate around limiting technology, just like we would have for any young person. So yes, it is not a blanket. I just, use that as an example, and always happy to get more information for you as well if you're interested in that particular topic.
Thank you.
And then I think Pamela?
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Jenny. So I actually was the youth representative for the group home care negotiating.
Oh, fantastic. You can speak much better about this than I can.
So it was a great opportunity to work with the youth and allow their input on the phones, for that example. So that was a great whack, because like you said, it was a great big deal for everybody to talk about why phones is needed. And as you were saying, we came to a conclusion of having it be an individualistic approach. So having a one-on-one talk with the youth, and that's kind of what the youth had really stood up for, was having that talk on whether or not, what are the boundaries with the phones. And I think that's great that, because, I had questions on like what were we gonna do with the wax, and so seeing it a part of the new priorities for the licensing was great, and another great example of a big step up for I can't remember exactly what whack, but it was involved with the youth's belongings. There was a lot of times the youth had expressed their feelings about not having their belongings put in boxes. Instead, they were put in garbage bags, just the white garbage bags. And so that to us meant a lot to us. And so seeing that a lot of our engagement as youth is now applying for your guys' priorities is just great to hear. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for going over that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time and effort in participating. I know those aren't easy to participate in. So really, really appreciate it. And that's the beauty of again, fancy name, right? Negotiated rulemaking, but that's the beauty, is that we can bring all these different impacted parties together in the same room and come up with something that really makes sense and meets everybody's needs as much as possible. So we could flip forward to the licensing next. Yeah, thank you. And so the other one was obviously, and I know you've probably heard about this, we've been talking about this quite a bit, our focus on kinship and kinship first, kinship culture here at DCYF. So our goal in 2024 was that 50% of kin will be licensed within 90 days. And that majority of them would be licensed within 120, 180 days. And now we're actually, we met that goal in 2024, that priority. And now we have a priority for 2025, which is about 80% of kin will be licensed within 90 days. So moving the bar on us here. And so really want to continue to have that focus. Again, licensing, it sounds like a very bureaucratic thing. Why do we care? All of that. The criticality of licensing for kin is that they actually get the resources that they need. And financial resources. And so that's why it's such a significant deal, and significant to do it as quickly as possible for them, so they don't have a gap in payment. And I think that might have been my last, oh no, I have JR, and then I'll be done, and I can hand it over to my colleague, Allison, who's joined here. So for juvenile rehabilitation, obviously you had a session on deep dive on JR previously. So don't need to go over too much of this, but in 2024, real focus on improving the safety and security at our secure institutions, including sort of physical improvements. So that is painting, getting rid of additional excess belongings. We've been working on additional fencing at our institution at Echo Glen, obviously, going through that permitting process. And really just trying to get that safety and security culture, as it's the foundation that we need in place before we can really do therapeutic. We've also completed the design of a new classification and infraction system. You heard a little bit about this from Patrick, but really looking at how do we classify individuals between medium security, maximum security, minimum security, and then what happens when there is behavior. And we are doing a significant project on infractions that is really, again, responsive to the needs of the youth and tries to be as rehabilitative as possible. And we also implemented community transition services. So in 2025, we have priorities around increasing the physical capacity of JR to safely and therapeutically meet the needs of young people. We are overcrowded, as you know, at Greenhouse School, and heard about that. And we need to have additional institutional capacity to meet the number of youth that are entering our juvenile rehab system. We will actually implement the new classification and infraction systems in this next year. And we also have a goal around making sure that 100% of youth are admitted to JR or assessed for mental health. And it says SUD, which is substance use disorder, needs at intake. And so really a focus on making sure that we're assessing, and then you'll see us have probably in 2026 some work around implementing and making sure we're meeting the needs of youth that have mental health and SUD needs. But we need to identify those first. And I believe that's basically my last slide, and open for additional questions.
I have a question, Jenny, which has to do with staffing. I didn't see, maybe I missed it on your priorities, anything that pertains to improving staffing patterns, either in JR or with child welfare. It seems like it's been an issue that we've heard about at the Oversight Board a lot. And I just wondered if that's reflected anywhere that I missed.
Thank you. No, I did not pull that out as a specific example. So thanks for the softball around this. It gives me an opportunity to talk about it. You will see a priority. So one of the priorities we have in 2025 is reducing turnover or increasing retention of our staff. And so our focus is, certainly we can keep hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring. And if we're not retaining quality staff, that does us no good. And retaining is critical. These jobs take time to get to master, to get good at. And we want to really have a focus around retaining staff. I will note that in our child welfare side, and we can certainly have a conversation about staffing levels. And I know Allison will probably talk about this some in her next section, and we'll probably tag team this. We are actually quote unquote, essentially fully staffed in child welfare. So we have people in all the positions that we are funded for. Does that mean we're adequately staffed for the workload? Probably not. But we are at least not having a lot of open positions that we are funded for that we cannot fill and we cannot retain. So I think sometimes just want to like highlight that we actually did have a real focus on this in the child welfare space, and we are seeing the improvement of that. We have increases in salaries happening in the collective bargaining agreements, which we, especially in the juvenile justice space, we believe salaries has been a significant problem in JR in terms of being able to recruit and retain high quality staff. And so hoping that those salary increases will result in some change for the JR side of the house. So it is a priority. You did not see a holistic list, and we are happy to, once those are finalized, share them out to this oversight board so you can see the totality. We actually, I think, probably too many, but we have, I think, close to like 30, 40 priorities for the agency. We're a large agency. We can do lots of things. And so I only gave you a little teaser.
Thank you. Pamela?
Yeah, so my question is so for the 2025 priorities for early learning, says develop implementation plan for expand access to affordable childcare. Is that, I don't know if you'd be able to answer my question, but is that just expanding your guys' like subsidy program that you guys have offering right now at the moment, or does that look like a whole new program? And then another question on top of that, sorry, it relates to this though, is would that to I guess expand it, would that look like possibly having new criteria added to people who can be do you know what I'm referring to, like requirements if you are able for like the subsidy program? Would that addition
our eligibility requirements? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm gonna actually thanks. Allison has joined, my phone a friend here, who I think is happy, and actually this might make a little bit of a good transition into Allison's topic of sort of where we would like to go and intended to go and have been asked to go under Fair Start for Kids Act, and what we can actually accomplish given the sort of budget realities that we have in the state. So
I see Danielle's got a question though too, just before Allison. Is it related, Danielle, to Jenny's presentation? Just don't want to skip you.
Of sorts, is kind of related to the question that was asked about child welfare staffing levels. So you had mentioned that it's positions that are funded. So I know there are some offices that are at like 50% staffing right now. So in those situations, are you talking about like those positions are not like fully funded type of situation, so that they're not counted in the statistic that we are like fully staffed?
Yeah, so I thank you. It's a good question. And I always feel like we could probably come back and do like 2 hours just on staffing because it gets really complicated in terms of how we want to track it. At the top line statewide level, we are actually currently slightly overspent on staff inside our child welfare funding. Individual office experiences are gonna differ, and I think that's always the challenge, right? So there may be, for example, some offices that were sort of temporarily, we're trying to get staffed and actually ended up over hiring, and some that are still under, and we're constantly trying to make sure we're moving those resources around to reflect, as people come and go, as cases move around, right? So we provide staffing to offices, and then families show up in different places. And so it is hard sometimes, I think, to quickly adjust to that. So that's probably a lot of what you're sort of experiencing, but happy to do a deep dive at some point, either with the oversight board or anyone who might be a subset who might be interested in terms of like how that plays out sort of office by office and the impact on caseload. We've done a tremendous amount of things on work on workload and have recommendations around appropriate levels of workload that will be, we're working on finalizing right now, and have some intention potentially of asking for additional resources to reflect that increase in the sort of complexity and workload associated with those cases. So thanks, it's a great question.
I'm happy to just sort of jump in
Yes.
and piggyback
Well,
on.
thank you, Jenny, very much. We appreciate your stopping in. And Allison, yes, please take it away.
And I think I'll be staying on. Allison and I will do a little bit of a tag team here on a couple of the things, just in case you have questions. So, but I'll kick it over to Allison.
Yeah, thanks so much. Jenny's going to stay on and help navigate through this pieces. I do want to just really briefly touch on the early learning questions that were asked, and I might also ping or flag. I'll follow up with some links to both internal DCYF presented sort of overviews of the legislative session. I also think this would be relevant for the conversation I'm going to head into. I also can link to the presentation that Nicole Rose, our Assistant Secretary for Early Learning, and I did both to Senator Wellman and Senator Wilson's committee in the Senate this week on early learning, as well as the House Appropriations. And spoiler alert, we'll be doing a similar thing to the Senate Ways and Means Committee next week. So there's a lot of sort of dialogue out there on what we're doing in early learning, what we've done, and sort of where we're headed. And also happy to come back and do a deeper dive with Nicole in sort of the early learning space. I do want to clarify, though, I think Lois Martin had asked a question about the 7% and the cost of quality sort of being merged into one work stream. To some extent, yes, we are thinking about, as Jenny described, that dynamic tension of rates and eligibility together. I do want to clarify, though, that our decision package that we submitted this year, we submitted two separate ones. One specific to rates around the 24 market rate survey that does talk about the cost of quality as the next layer, and one specific to eligibility and eligibility expansion to what is outlined in Fair Start. The rates one was funded in the governor's budget. The eligibility expansion one was not. And so happy to send the slides to sort of walk through those. So Lois, at this point, the department is really sticking true to asking for rates as outlined in law, market rate survey, and beginning to talk about if we want to move from MRS to cost of quality, what does that rate model look like? There's a parallel and separate conversation related to family eligibility that has some benchmarks outlined in Fair Start and ideally gets to a place of 7%. So we do talk about them as a work stream together a lot in the agency. And when we sort of engage in dialogue formally with the governor's office and the legislature, those are sort of separate funding asks. So happy to do some follow-up there. I think that's fair. And I see Senator Wilson shaking her head. She could also probably do that deep dive on our behalf as well. All right. I was asked, invited to come share a little bit today with you about, there's a lot of swirl, if you will, in the land of state spending, budget reductions, freezes. The legislature is now in session. There's a new governor. We have a new secretary. And I am just, I'm going to hope to sort of set the context and set the record accurately, if you will, of what we are and aren't doing in agency land related to spending and freezes, where we're at in the legislative process. I don't have slides prepared. I will link to the recorded webinars we've done on our decision packages previewing the governor's budget. Really hoping to have a conversation here and get your questions clarified, so we're sort of all on the same page about what is swirling in the land of transition and spending. So I'll set a little context. Happy to take questions as I go. In November, so I'm going to go back in history. In November, state agencies were asked to submit potential recommendations for reductions. All agencies were asked by OFM to submit a list. We were not given targets or dollar amounts. We were not given explicit instruction of sort of do this or do that. DCYF took approach and built some values around we want to protect core service. We don't want to reduce or eliminate things that maximize services directly to families or staffing. And we were not taking reductions in the juvenile rehabilitation space. So with that, we prepared a set of recommendations, potential recommendations that were submitted to OFM and the governor's office for analysis. I believe I shared those and those have been shared with the board, but they're public. Okay, I see heads nodding. Great. My recollection of November is clear. So those went over to inform the OFM and the governor as they built their proposed budget. We then in December 2nd, I was just pulling up the material, got explicit direction, we and every other cabinet level agency, to implement a hiring freeze, a travel freeze, and a goods and services or contract spending freeze, if you will. So there are three freezes that came with explicit direction. We then really quickly turned around, how are we going to implement these freezes? So the agency is operating under those 3 freezes. Those freezes do not impact hiring of direct care staff. So if there is a vacancy that comes in a JR space or a child welfare space, we are working to refill those. We also are continuing to move forward with Stafford Creek, the JR capacity expansion and hiring for that superintendent and those staffing positions that are necessary. So that frontline direct care, health, public safety, public health, public safety element, those positions were exempt from that hiring freeze. There are also some other exemptions that are built in. What DCYF has done is stood up some review committees, one on hiring, one on travel, and one on goods and services or contracts requests, to review all those requests that are coming and approve them, or say they don't meet criteria for exemption, or they do meet criteria for exemption, but then they're going to need a secondary level of approval potentially from the secretary and OFM. So things are moving a bit, I don't want to say slower, but by default, a bit slower, and moving with a few more checks and balances as we are operating under these directions of hiring freezes, travel freezes, and goods and purchases freezes. So that's where we're at in implementing sort of the freezes. We are not implementing the budget reduction recommendations that we sent over in November. That was an exercise to gather information. We have not been directed to implement those. We are not implementing spending reductions related to that. We are implementing a process of checks and balances related to the contracts freeze. So there are some contracts that we're moving forward. Thanks, Jenny. There are some contracts that I just want to highlight because I think it's relevant. There was some funding we received in relationship to 6109 from the legislature last year. That funding was one time. So we only had funding in this fiscal year through June 30th of 25. Those contracts had not yet been executed as of December 2nd, when the freeze directions came. So those contracts went through the review process. Because those contracts, that funding was one time and they were not funded in the proposed governor's budget, we have made a decision as an agency to not execute those contracts. By the time those would be executed in January, we would have 4 to 5 months of funding and services stood up that all indication is would not continue as of July 1, and that work would stop. So I think I want to clarify some of the confusion around sort of spending and budget reductions in context of the freeze realities. And that's, I think, the most salient example that I want to highlight. I'm going to pause as I see hands because I know this is confusing.
Lois? Thank you, Diane. So, Allison, I have a question about the travel freeze. How is that going to impact the many advisory councils that DCYF has, as far as being able to bring folk together in person? I know that that was a priority for community engagement, and I know your office, so I'm just curious as to what your plan is to be able to pivot if there is a budget freeze on travel and transportation.
Yeah, so immediately, great question, Lois, and I sort of want to shed a little bit of a tear, but immediately on receipt of those travel freezes and then the subsequent clarification, I have directed the community engagement team to pivot all advisory body meetings to virtual for this year. That's unfortunate, and I'm sad to do that. Just by way of example, we had a leadership summit planned for December 12th, 13th, or the week of December 12th, all of our supervisors, managers coming together in Spokane. We got the travel freeze on December 2nd. We pivoted that entire conference to a virtual conference. We did a great job. It was fantastic, but it was unfortunate that we were not able to gather in person. So the travel freeze is having a real impact on those pieces. We are pivoting all of our advisory. We are pivoting all of our advisory body meetings to virtual until there is different direction.
Thank you for answering.
Yeah.
Pamela, I see you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, really sad to hear about the travel freezes. I was wondering, I don't know if you know answer this, because I know some of the youth who work or who do like co-design sessions with DCYF. So I do travel with DCYF for like Passion to Action. Now, are those youth who do get paid to travel over to the other side of Washington to meet for these meetings, or will they be affected as well for these travel freezes?
They could be. My indication is yes. There may be some ask for exemptions through that process, that internal controls process I've described, and there could be potential exemptions. Passion to Action is not overseen in my division, so I don't know, Pamela. We can certainly follow up with the details there. But the exemption process is, I want to be clear on the travel space. If there are staff that are traveling for their job, like doing a 24-hour or 72-hour response, those staff are still traveling. Staff who are traveling as a core component of their job for public health and safety, licensors doing visits, annual monitoring visits or investigations, those staff are still traveling. And Pamela, there will likely be an impact to some of those other travel groups like Passion to Action, like work groups, like some things that got together in person. We are not going to be able to pay for travel for staff or participants of those groups under this freeze. And Jenny, I saw you come up mute, so I'll pause there.
Just to, and you know, you'll see this if you go to the information on OFM freezes, and just a tiny piece of sort of nuance here. There's things that were specifically exempted from the freeze, and that's an exemption. So those types of travel, for example, that are directly related to clients, we take youth to meet up with families out of state. Those types of, obviously our social workers have to travel throughout the state to do their jobs. Those are not impacted, and those are clearly exempted. The agency can also request, authorize and approve an exception if it's not clearly called out. So there may be conversations about some of these advisory groups. If we think that there's a really critical meeting, we could potentially issue an exception. We have to report those exceptions to OFM, and you can see what agencies in total, including DCYF, are approving for exceptions at the links that I provided in the chat.
Thanks, Jenny. So that's a bit about where we are in what happened in like November and December. Now I'm going to pivot to say what's happened since January 2nd. Turns out we're only a few days into the new year and a lot is going on. So the legislature came to town on Monday, and we're on day 5, but I'm not counting, of the legislative session, and they're going to move through their work like they do every year. There's a proposed budget from the governor. They're going to move through and have bill and committee hearings and budget hearings and work sessions, and they're going to contemplate a lot of things. And then by April 27th, which I believe is the last day of session, the legislature will, I'm putting good omens into the universe, pass a budget that becomes the state's operating budget effective July 1. The governor released his budget. That budget includes some increases in spending. It also includes some agency reductions for us and other agencies. Again, those are all linked in the webinar I'll send after as soon as I'm done, or drop in the chat if I can manage two things at once here in a moment. We're not implementing his budget, just like we wouldn't implement his budget any other year, including the reductions, until there's direction from the legislature. The other thing that happened is we have a new governor on Wednesday. And so the new governor has issued some statements related to a $4 billion savings, administrative efficiencies. We have not received explicit instruction for that. We have not received direction. We have not received instruction. So we are not acting on that reality. We know there is statements related to potential agency reductions of 6% or 10 to 20% in management. I anticipate we might really receive some directions for assignments or clarity from OFM. We'll keep you updated as we do receive those. But at this time, we have not received those directions and are not implementing additional freezes, pauses, reductions, etc. We are operating under the freezes from December. We are reviewing things with extra sort of internal control, asking for exemptions when we need them, pausing travel. Great questions, Pamela and Lois. That's a real concrete example. Choosing not to implement some one-time spending contracts, etc. So that's sort of the context of where the agency is at on January 17th at 10:25 a.m. Related to sort of all the information we have from our previous authorizing environment and governor and the current authorizing environment and governor. I'm going to pause there and see if there are questions or other additional information that would be helpful. In the meantime, I will also find the link to those webinars and slides and drop those in the chat.
Allison, just a time thing. We actually only have 4 signed up for our public comment today. So I think if you need to go a little long, if people have questions for you, please feel free to take another 5-10 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you. Wondering if there's
I'll just note that we're trying to sort of do our best to merge multiple pieces of information. So as Allison was sort of saying, when we had the conversation about those contracts related to 6109 and public health nurses and home visiting slots, we had concerns obviously about the one-time nature of that and how sort of we're asking potentially our contractors to spin up work for not very long length of time. And then we also got, at the time, Governor-elect Ferguson, now seated Governor Ferguson, clearly giving some direction about a desire to look at and examine pilots, one-time type spending. And so when we sort of combine those 2 pieces of information, that was really what was instructing us. And so we are actually gathering some information right now, also looking at, what pilots have we been asked to do across the agency, and we'll certainly have to probably provide that information to our Office of Financial Management. So these start to interplay with each other in terms of where do we think the governor is going, and also how does the freeze impact these. And I'm sure it is potentially confusing for the outside world to try to navigate. It's confusing inside the agency with this level of transition.
Well, I actually had sort of a kind of a bigger question, I guess, in general, which is, when you look at some of your successes as an agency, in particular, maybe this isn't just your success, but the state's success. I'm thinking about our kindergarten readiness, how we've improved over the last several years in all areas, although we still have some disparity amongst racial and ethnic groups in that data. And then I look at some of the potential, and I know you said that it was just potential cuts to early childhood programs. And I also think about, and similarly, the placement exemptions. We've seen some improvement, right? But then we also know that the Burien site is going to close. So I'm just wondering how you guys in the agency reflect on what is successful without pulling the rug out of what is successful, so we see the numbers dropping. And I don't know, that's a big question, but I just throw that up to get some input on.
It's a big question, and it is the moral conundrum I think that many of us who do this work every day sit in and feel really a lot of emotion around. I think I love beautifully how you sort of talked about, we've had some great success, and that success is not without investment, resource investment, infrastructure, capacity, and growth. And I would be remiss to say that if we experience reductions, I think there's potential delays in expansion of things, which is one sort of bucket. That's a thing, and we're worried about that. I think we would be more worried if we see reductions into current service lines, current realities. And I don't know that's unavoidable this year. I don't envy the position our lawmaker friends are in over the next few months and our governor's office is in. I think that's going to be the tension, right? How do we learn from what happened in the 2008, 9, 10 era? And how do we ensure that as an agency, we are very clear with our lawmaker friends and those who do the budget work in the governor's office to say, all of it's bad. I want to be really clear, but some things are more bad than others, if you will, or can do more harm or hinder the success or take us backwards or prevent. And so I think Diane, this is the dynamic tension this agency is going to be in. And the next few months are going to be really, really, really challenging for us, for our colleagues. Danielle's hand up across the agency and our colleagues across the state. I know, Jenny, I saw you come off mute, and then I do see.
Yeah, I know Danielle has a question, so I want to make sure we get to it. I was Senate staff during 2008 to 2013. It was really challenging. I know many of you were around and watching that. And so I think in addition to what Allison said, obviously some of this, again, even though 6109 contracts, we really had a lot of heartburn and had a lot of conversation in terms of the agency, because we knew that those are critical services that families needed. And so really trying to balance those. The other thing we're going to be looking for is how do we lean into what do we know works, right? And how can we get, creative get real laser focused on the things that we know work, because that's how you sort of use your resources to the best of your abilities in times that are challenging. And coming out of that recession, there were many cuts that were very hard for us. And there was also some reforms that happened that I think really fundamentally changed and moved us forward. So both things can potentially be possible, and we'll try to do as much of that sort of judo maneuver as possible as we can during this time. But also recognize that Danielle had a question.
Yeah, so I know it had been mentioned that like case carrying positions within the various components of DCYF aren't being frozen, but I have noticed on some of the organization charts that are available, there are frozen positions that have like just became vacant within the past month or two. So is that one of those situations where moving forward, those positions are going to be frozen or not frozen as they become vacant?
I think so. This is speaking to a great, we thought this, but this topic might come up. There was a bit of a timing thing that happened where two things happened sort of simultaneously that are actually not connected to each other. So one is that obviously we have the freeze, but we are clearly allowed to move forward with any case carrying positions. I sit on the position, what we call position control, and we look at all of those and we are allowing those to move forward. We actually don't even require those positions to be seen by that group. They can just be moving forward. What I spoke about earlier, which is that child welfare is spending all of its funded staff, that's happening. And so what happened is we sort of ramped up. We wanted to make sure we got to that full staffing. We're there now in terms of what we're funded, the position level we're funded for. And so you're seeing an inability to potentially fill positions because we have to come back into alignment with what we're funded for. So right now, child welfare is actually overspending on its staff, and we can't have that situation because the agency can't be overspent in totality. And so we are sort of pulling back on that. Those two things happen sort of simultaneously, unrelated, but I definitely see how people are connecting them as related items, but they really are two separate issues that are going on for us. And regardless of if the hiring freeze was not in place, you would still see that happening in child welfare because they have to come back into alignment with their budget.
All right. Well, thank you. I think if Senator Wilson concurs and Laisha, that we'll go ahead and move to the public comment. We surely appreciate Jenny and Allison's coming to present to us today and provide us with information. I made some notes about some follow-up questions and further agendas. I'm sure Laisha and Nicholas have done the same. So we will probably circle back to you to address some of those at a future time. Thank you. All right, so without further ado, we're going to move on to the public comment portion. As always, we will read I will read a prepared piece about our public comment before we start. The DCYF Oversight Board operates under state law, which outlines its authority and responsibilities. Specifically, the board is responsible for monitoring DCYF's progress towards achieving outcome measures, ensuring DCYF's compliance with applicable laws and policies, overseeing DCYF's performance and policies, offering advice and input to DCYF, the legislature, and the governor. While the board may consider information brought to its attention as part of its general oversight and monitoring role, it does not have the authority to investigate, direct, or alter DCYF's decisions in individual cases. Additionally, during public comment periods, neither the board nor the presenters can respond to comments beyond a simple acknowledgement. To respect individuals who have sensitive stories to share or wish to discuss details of individual cases, we'd like to remind you that the board is subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. This means that our meetings are open to the public, recorded, posted on the Oversight Board's website, and live streamed on TVW. Written public comments submitted in advance. Actually, I don't think we had any written comments this time, Nicholas. So we didn't have any that were submitted to the board in advance. And this morning we have 4 folks that are signed up. We'd like you to try to keep to 3 minutes if you can. And we'll start with Kathy Elkins.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, members of the DCYF Oversight Committee. My name is Kathy Elkins. I'm an educator, a former school administrator who has led many injury investigations, but most importantly, a grandmother fighting for justice. Today, I speak not only for my granddaughter, Winona, but for the countless children and families harmed by a broken DCYF. Winona's case highlights serious systemic flaws. On October 3rd, 2023, a false diagnosis of a skull fracture triggered harmful actions. DCYF failed to investigate properly and submitted a falsified dependency petition. The injuries reported to CPS by the hospital included the false skull fracture and 2 minor marks caused by gravity, including a 2-day forehead bruise from a burping incident and a clothing mark. 23 minutes after learning the skull fracture diagnosis was wrong, a doctor wrote and submitted an error-filled report diagnosing abuse without a complete DCYF investigation. Critical evidence offered was ignored by DCYF. A text message explaining the bruise wasn't reviewed. Paternal grandmother who acknowledged holding Winona when the bruise happened waited 2 days in the hospital to be interviewed and was not. Recorded police interview language was ignored over third and fourth hand comments. Thigpen said Winona bonked her head and grandma cut her lip, and that turned into bashed head and split lip, which they never said. By investigators believing they were speaking to people who had allowed a 5-week-old baby to have a fractured skull. Photos CPS took of the swaddle with very thick seams, I'm holding this up, it was taken in their home, and you can see these thick seams that might cause a line on the arm they were referring to, were ignored. They were never shared with the doctor or the police. And they were laying in, this was laying in Winona's bassinet. It was a photo taken by a CPS caseworker. The family were also not shared with this information. Instead, DCYF hid and falsified information. One injury was called into law enforcement, the skull fracture. Yet in court, DCYF's attorney alleged there were no criminal charges because the police were protecting Thigpens due to privilege. This isn't just negligence, it's harm. DCYF staff involved in these actions must be investigated. I believe DCYF played a role in the quiet removal of the doctor whose misdiagnoses have caused great financial damage to DCYF and harm to children. She has moved to other states. DCYF should be transparent regarding this doctor instead of remaining silent and allowing harm foisted on children in other states. In my granddaughter's case, I estimate over $1 million of the taxpayer money was spent on this case, wasting resources. Other accusations from the same doctor resulted in more wasted DCYF resources, ending in dismissed dependency. This is avoidable, and with better policies and procedures, investigations done well from the beginning will save public funds. Information should not come out in court. My detailed reports were ignored by DCYF and the ombuds. The DCYF supervisor responded, "Thanks, it will be case noted in the file." And the ombuds said nothing was wrong. And those were before we received the file and learned of even more horrific oversights. The doctor changed her report 19 days after writing it to add on a bruise that DCYF acknowledged was gone. You cannot fix something that is broken unless you acknowledge it's broken. We request to appoint someone to review this material, not for our help, but to understand the overwhelming extent of the problems with DCYF investigations. There's a lot to be learned from the Thigpen case. I provided specific issues and proposed solutions. These reforms can prevent false accusations, save tens of millions of dollars, and also ensure investigations result in actionable evidence when real abuse and neglect occurs, not false accusations. My family and I offer to our help in being part of the solution so that taxpayer dollars do not go towards helping children rather than harming them. I'm an experienced school administrator and am adept at making investigations accurate and efficient. We are ready to work with you and help. And I would like to follow up this at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We'll next hear from Douglas Thigpen.
Doctors, senators, esteemed members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to spend this 3 minutes here. My name is Casey Thigpen. I'm a business executive, a non-practicing ordained minister as well. My daughter-in-law, unable to carry to term, miscarried twice before deciding on a last resort medical procedure. Despite nearly dying from that, she miraculously gave birth to our beloved granddaughter. Little did they know they would become victims of DCYF's failures. Our nightmare began on October 2023 when our miracle Winona was taken to urgent care for what we now know was a rhinovirus. While there, she was misdiagnosed with a skull fracture, leading to the hospital contacting DCYF and the local sheriff. Despite the sheriff's department dropping the case after determining there was no child abuse, DCYF intensified their involvement with an invasive safety plan. A meeting with the child abuse pediatrician, DCYF, and the hospital's caseworker revealed that DCYF had done no investigation. The hospital's caseworker acknowledged this and suggested downgrading the safety plan, which DCYF did, but kept extending without reason. DCYF obstructed our efforts to get a second medical opinion by alerting the child abuse pediatrician, who nullified the second opinion by calling ahead before we arrived. By December 2023, we sought legal counsel, and DCYF then petitioned for custody of our granddaughter. After months of court battles, the case was dismissed, but DCYF still claimed negligence, even though the parents were licensed to foster. Our court date to reverse this finding is in April. The same doctor misdiagnosed a skull fracture in another child, and the family's case was dismissed specifically because of a lack of DCYF investigation. DCYF's actions have highlighted systemic issues where families are presumed guilty and must prove their innocence. This system tears families apart without merit and fails to conduct proper investigations. Since this ordeal started, the child abuse pediatrician has been removed from her role at the hospital, another indicator that this family has been wronged. Our DCYF caseworker was grossly incompetent, as was her direct supervisor. Both lied verbally and in their documents. Neither performed an investigation into any allegations. DCYF's original intake form spoke only of a skull fracture. Once that error was determined, DCYF created a new intake form with different information to share with the court. Our experience shows the need for DCYF reform. While protecting children is crucial, DCYF must also be held accountable for their mistakes and ensure they do not unjustly harm families. We continue to fight for justice as no investigation has been done, and this must change to prevent other families from enduring similar ordeals. My ask to this board is to assign someone to perform an investigation, not to change CPS's results or DCYF's results, but in their performance. I'm confident in doing so, you will see the same opportunities that we as a loving family see. Thank you for the 3 minutes.
Thank you for your comments. We next have Anna Day.
Hi, Diane. This is Nicholas. I do not see a name matching that in the attendance list.
Okay, then we have Mathis Van Leeuwen. I probably didn't say your name correctly, so please feel free to correct me.
Same as before. I do not see that name in the list.
Okay. So that would end our public comment. We now have a break. Let's do a time check. So it's 10:44. Elisha, what do you think? Do you want to just reconvene at 11? Give everybody 15 minutes?
I think that would be perfect. 11.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll see you all at We'll see you all.
Perfect. Glad I hustled.
Timely group. Thanks for coming back on. And is our next guest in the Oh, there she is. She's coming in. Hello, no longer Representative Sen, newly anointed and appointed Secretary Sen. And I saw a photo today on social media where you were signing the papers to say that I truly am taking on this new role. And I just want to say, on behalf of myself, first and foremost, but all my friends in this room, just congratulations, and really looking forward to our continued partnership, albeit in a different bit of a way. The last couple weeks, it's been interesting when we've been on a screen. I have to say, are you there as the representative, or are you there as an acting secretary? So just absolutely my honor to introduce you as the second secretary for the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services for the state of Washington. And I know there are others in this room that could say just volumes about the work that you've done. And the hope is we'll continue it on the legislative side, and we will hopefully all be supportive of the work that you're doing on the other side. And with that, I would just want to pass it on and give you the total floor to let us know. This is what, day 2?
Yes.
Kind of what's your plan? And I just want to say thank you also for being willing to sit in front of us on day 2. I think you found your office, and I'm sure there's more you've done, but just take it away. And congratulations, Secretary Sen.
Thank you so much, Senator Wilson and Dr. Levy and Lisha and the rest of the board. It's such a pleasure to be here. And as you all know, I served on this oversight board, chaired this oversight board. So kind of funny to be in a new capacity and in this capacity. And I will miss working with you, but also know that I was very clear that I was not taking a new job where I'm not working with anyone that I used to love and work closely with. This is just a transition, albeit a large one. So it is exciting. And I'd like to welcome Senator Christian to the Oversight Board and back to the legislature. And it was great to be able to work with him when he was in the House. And so excited, and hope to meet Marion and Pamela and April, who I know quite well. Can't wait to see you in person sometime soon. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, so this is day 2, being secretary, but as you all know, I've been chair of Human Services, Youth, and Early Learning in the House for the past 6 years and served on that committee for another few years before that. And these are really the areas that I'm most passionate about. So I feel like I'm diving into not the shallow end, not the deep end, but maybe, somewhere in the middle. Over the next few months, I plan to travel around the state, visit different locations, different facilities, meet with lots of staff members, do a lot of listening, because I'm already rapidly realizing and knowing that being a legislator is different than implementing. But that was really what was exciting about taking this job. We have passed some really incredible legislation over the past, 6 years, 10 years. And the idea of being able to help facilitate the implementation is really exciting. And especially as the next 4 years, or the next 2 years, at least, with a budget lull and some changes on the federal government, I feel like this is where I can have the greatest impact. So I'm really excited to be working for the children and families of Washington State. So far, I've been telling staff, and my emphasis is really, for this first year in particular, is really around three things out of the gate, 3 fundamentals, and that is communication, support, and service. So when I think about communication, we only have 17% of eligible families who could access Working Connections childcare accessing it. And we need to do a better job communicating with those families, with the public, so that they know about the great offerings that we have, about volunteer placement agreements, about other services, so that so people know what wonderful things that there are and they can take advantage of. And just as importantly, we need to communicate internally better, whether it's with our childcare providers, sharing new laws and trainings and goals with our social workers, or just doing a better job of how and communicating the why of change management. So communication is definitely going to be a huge focus. Support. I know that our social workers need support and they need to feel supported. And that goes for our childcare providers and for our amazing staff at our juvenile rehabilitation facilities. And so we need to make sure that we have a focus on how do we support our staff who are doing really emotional, critical, and intense work. And we also need to make sure families are feeling supported. If we hear comments that, a foster family is not feeling supported, or a biological family who's getting a child back, reuniting with their child is not feeling supported, that's a miss for us. So really focusing on support. And then the third is serve. Having that service mindset. Everyone in this department is really focused on public service and would love to also bring in the customer service aspect. We heard that it's hard to apply for Working Connections childcare. Sometimes it's challenging. Again, we hear from our providers and caregivers that it is hard to, whether it's getting licensed or finding materials that they need on the website, other things that we really need to have a customer service mentality, in addition to just a serving and communicating with and supporting our families and workforce. So those are kind of three overarching themes that I'm hoping to really focus on this year, in addition to the critical things that you heard from Allison and Jenny that we need to be focusing on, which are more of the service provision. So I'm looking forward to diving in. I'm looking forward to working with this new governor as part of his cabinet. And he's really indicated that he's going to be working with us secretaries and directors as a cabinet and influencing and being part of his decision-making. And just yesterday we had our first cabinet meeting, and one of the stories that was shared that really motivates the governor was about a child welfare case and just how meaningful it was for him to be in attendance at a reunification and just the positive impact that we can make on people's lives. And so I'm excited, I'm inspired. I love that he had tapped me for his transition team before he offered me his position to focus on childcare. So that has already been a priority and a very clear priority for him. So I'm really excited about what the next few years can bring. So I will stop there and be absolutely happy to answer questions.
Oh, I know people must have questions for Secretary Sen. We'll give you a sec we'll do the teacher think time here. Diane.
Well, I'm always one to jump in, but I think my question, actually, you have a unique position for us because you were on our oversight board for many years. So I guess going forward in your new position, do you have any thoughts about the relationship between the oversight board and DCYF and what you'd like to see in the future? Any changes? Anything that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, great question. So I think that while I know your oversight for us, and so, a lot of your recommendations and a lot of your inquiry is not going to be funneled by any means through DCYF. But I know that we would love to work closer with you on data and with the data that you put forward or you analyze or that you use on recommendations or in sharing to make sure that we are aligned and in agreement in terms of what we think the actual data is saying or available or broadly what we might have that you don't have access to, or you don't feel like you have access to, so we can be more aligned and helpful and work together to make sure, again, that we're putting forward data that is, vetted to be in agreement that this is the data that we should all be looking at and utilizing. So that, just off the top of my head, I know is something that we would love, we at the agency would love to work with you closer on. And, I think really excited at kind of some of the focus that you guys have been really zeroing in on, and any way that we can continue to assist you, we will do so.
Ruth Kagi. You have to unmute in order for the secretary to respond.
Well, I just want to express my excitement and congratulations, and I'm just so pleased that you are going to be leading the department. I mean, we worked together to pass the legislation to create the department. So I can't think of anyone who has a better understanding of what the vision of the legislature was in creating this. And one of the concepts that we talked about on the Blue Ribbon Commission and in the legislation was the fact that so many of the services that DCYF must rely on are provided by other departments. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, I know you've got your own department, you've got to get your arms around, but the behavioral health and the other services that are so critical to the children and families that you will serve. Just what thoughts you have around that. I was at a conference with Senator Wilson last month where we talked about the idea of a children's cabinet. So, that's one concept, but, and there are other states that have done that, that I'd be happy to help get information on. So just your thoughts about working with other departments and how we can really assure that everybody's rowing in the same direction.
Thank you, Ruth. Great questions and great to see you. And we have I don't want to say it's a joke, but we would share that when House members went over to the Senate, we would call them house trained. And that was always very, that it was really a bonus that people understood how the House worked before they went over to the Senate. So Senator Christian is, wonderfully house trained. But I would like to say that I have been TAGI trained. And so I am just absolutely indebted to you, Ruth, for all that you provided to me in terms of guidance and mentorship and teaching me the ropes and showing me how it's done. And I just will be forever in your debt and so appreciative. So truly, it's been an honor working with you, and I look forward to continuing that. So when I was being interviewed for this position with Governor-elect Ferguson and his team, one of the things that I brought up, and then one of the things that they were thrilled that I brought up, was really the importance of having the agencies work together. So, the past few years, we have passed legislation that was necessary, but unnecessary. So we needed it because we had to get the work done. But I feel like we shouldn't have to have needed it. Just directing the agencies to work together, right? To serve complex kids, to serve kids with disabilities in foster care. Those are things that the agencies should be working together on without requiring legislation. And so I definitely am focused on that. I think that Governor Ferguson and utilizing his secretaries and directors as a cabinet, that will help facilitate that. And I imagine the question about working together was also shared, the emphasis and the importance of that was also shared in people's interviews. And so I'm really excited about the potential of how we can work together better as government to make sure that we have agency to agency cooperation and vision and providing those services, again, under that serve and support category. So we're getting families and kids the services they need, not just responding to their request or their inquiry or their application, but working with them to get them what they need, whether it's at DCYF or DSHS or HCA or Commerce or OSPI. So that is definitely a strong emphasis for me, and I think hopefully a change that we'll see in the coming years.
It's really encouraging. Thank you.
Pamela.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you virtually. I don't think we got to talk last time in our last meeting, but thank you for all your hard work and supporting these kids and families. It really truly means a lot to me. I had two questions actually. So since you will be taking on your new role as secretary, will you still be joining us for future meetings? And the other question I had too was, what are your thoughts in incorporating, like lived experience youth who've been in the system and having their experiences add to DCYF and ensuring that, these new laws or policies or anything really related to DCYF, their opinions get incorporated. We did the negotiated rule meeting recently with the foster care. That's what we're doing right now, but we did the group home care. And I know the group just absolutely loved the idea of having their voices heard. And there was lots of things that all the departments had learned. You had to mention, like the departments coming together and working together. But I definitely agree. And I also think that having youth who've been in the system is such a great insight as well, because they've lived in their shoes of being in the actual child welfare system and have so many fruitful, sorry, again, lost my thoughts. Fruitful ways to go in and figure out what could be done differently that, staffing can't be able to do. So I just kind of want to know if more lived experts will be incorporated more for DCYF and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Pamela, thank you for the question. Thank you for participating in the Oversight Board. I remember when we added young voices and just listening to this meeting earlier already, the fact that you've been so engaged in the rulemaking, that you were reflecting and sharing how important it was to engage young people to make sure that we were really understanding how you are feeling about using a bag versus a box, and that we're including you to make sure that those, the rules that we're putting in place make sense for the people we're trying to serve. So I so appreciate your participation and this question. I have always found it so incredibly valuable to listen to lived experience, whether it's attending Mockingbird summits and meeting with Mockingbird youth and their lobbyists, working with Treehouse super closely. I'm on the board of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Bellevue. Working with young people that we're serving and that we're helping is I think, fundamental to our work. Even visiting, I visited Monroe Correctional Center and met with, foster youth who are now incarcerated, and just understanding kind of that lifelong impact and the intersections of all of these services that are under DCYF and all of these components, and really understanding the impacts on people's lives. So I so appreciate your question. And I wrote it down to make sure that I go back and kind of get an inventory of what organizations, public engagement we have, and if there are young people on and all of those committees. So I absolutely value that. And that lived experience also translates to, for instance, childcare providers. So before I knew that I was going to be DCYF secretary, I did introduce legislation that will move the date for childcare provider education requirements out a little bit further, and then calls to bring in those providers together to help develop the new rules and ongoing education and experience requirements for childcare providers, instead of having the legislature try to write out what they should be. We need to be talking to those who are in the community and doing the work to make sure that we're getting the rules right. We understand what is helpful and what is not helpful, like, you know, restricting a director at an agency from having a business degree, you know, is silly. That's kind of the things that we need to understand and that we need to realize versus just thinking, you know, in our own offices of what makes sense. So lived experience is critical. I so appreciate the question. And again, thank you for being engaged here and so much in your community.
Thank you so much. And that makes me so happy to hear that you value your opinions, and thank you for all you do.
And apparently I must say also, I have two kids, 19 and 22. And so I learned so much from them every day. So if I did not understand the value of, you know, lived experience in young people's voices, I wouldn't be a good mom, or I would be kidding myself that I haven't been impacted and influenced by those voices. So it's definitely forefront of my mind every day.
Secretary Sen, your childcare bill will be carried on. So just so you know, it's not lost, even though you are not on in the legislative side anymore. And I see Judge Bridges has her hand up, and then also April. So we'll go in that order.
Thanks very much. First of all, congratulations. It's just wonderful to see you in this position, and it just holds such promise and hope. And we were woefully short of both of those things recently, so this is great. I almost didn't do this though because I'm on Whidbey Island and the growlers have come to visit, so I'm going to get this out as fast as I can. You have had about 48 hours to focus on a situation that has been captivating headlines, front page, editorials, op-eds, et cetera, and rightly so. And even this board, who had its a total meeting about this situation at Green Hill. So JR, kind of not your home field, but I'd just like to ask what's your approach going to be to kind of catching up against this wave? And here they come.
Yeah. Thank you, Justice Bridges. It's so wonderful to get to continue to work with you, and so grateful for all of your decades of service, really focused on the kids and families that we get to work with. So really appreciate your leadership and experience. Yes, JR is definitely, and Green Hill is definitely at the top of the agenda and requiring action. I have always really focused on the importance of trauma-informed care, of responsiveness, of making sure that JR is rehabilitative. At the same time, we have to make sure, first and foremost, that it's safe for both the residents there and the staff. And until we address that and the overcrowding, the rehabilitation, the education, and those programs are not impossible to deliver, but very challenging to deliver. And so focusing on reducing capacity and relieving capacity constraints is of utmost importance. We are moving forward to provide some more beds at another facility, as you all have undoubtedly heard, and that's moving along and hopefully come about around March. And that will relieve some, but I do believe that it's a continuum, that we need to not just focus on the capacity through facilities, but through prevention upstream, through using our community transition services, our community facilities, and our and other policies to relieve the numbers at juvenile rehabilitation. I'm also really looking forward to working and have a good relationship with the county juvenile courts, and know that this is not just, we receive these young people and then we serve them, but we need to work closely with our partners in the communities, in the counties, in the cities, to understand better who is coming, when they're coming, what and why they're coming, what services they might need, what are the crimes that have been committed, what are the extenuating circumstances for many of them, and just have a better relationship there so that we get information earlier, we can coordinate better. And I think all of that is very important, and I'm looking forward to very early on connecting. And similarly, meeting with some county hotspots, if you will. There are definitely areas and counties that are sending more young people to juvenile rehabilitation than we've seen in the past, that we've seen in our most populous counties. And so really understanding what is the, it's not just an increase in crime, but also how different counties decide to use diversion or not, or how to prosecute or not, or how to, provide other services or not. And so understanding some of those, I would say, hotspots and working together with them to understand the impacts and the reasons why, and ways that we can maybe support and focus some of our services in those areas as well. So I think really looking at the data, looking at partnerships, taking action, keeping rehabilitation on the front burner, but recognizing that, it's really hard to do when people aren't feeling comfortable and safe.
Totally. Thank you so much for that response, particularly the latter point you're making about relationships with the counties. It's been fraught for years before there was a DCYF and after there was a DCYF. So working on that is just aces in my book. Thanks.
Thanks, Justice Bridge. I was a Mercer Island City Council member. I received a City Superhero Award. So working with the local governments, I understand that intersection and how important that, not just cross agencies, but cross governments is. And have, for years had great relationships with the juvenile court administrators and look forward to, and judges, and look forward to continuing those relationships.
April.
Hi, I am going to not ask my question because my dogs are going crazy right now. But I just want to say I'm super excited to work with you, Secretary Sen. See you on the other side.
Thank you, April. I'm super excited. I was thrilled to see your appointment come across my email. Congratulations and great to see you.
Secretary Sen, we had a little bit of a conversation earlier around the Fair Start for Kids Act and subsidy rates and provider rates and such. And just curious, as you're moving into this new role as being the co-prime sponsor of Fair Start for Kids, kind of what your thinking is given the current budget kind of scenario that you're in, and how you see us approaching or tackling the issue of workforce stability, but also increasing access for families across our state.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Wilson. So amazing to work with you on this really fundamental legislation that has really dramatically shifted the way that families, or the fact that families can access more childcare and make it more affordable. And clearly we still have a long ways to go. I love Speaker Jenkins mentioned that just in the past few years, 12,000 more families have been able to access childcare, and we have just seen a dramatic increase in the use of our subsidies, and we know more families need it. So I'm really excited. So as I mentioned, one thing that I'm disappointed that we are probably not going to be able to move forward at the timetable that we had initially rolled out to increase eligibility for Working Connections childcare. On the same hand, we know that there are lots of families who still, within the eligibility that we have in law, are not accessing the subsidy. And whether that's because they don't know about it, the application is difficult, or they just can't find childcare to use it, we know we need to work on the capacity, on slots, making sure that whether we're working with ECAP or transition to kindergarten, that it's really that we have more places for more young people to go so that they're getting ready for kindergarten and families can go to work. And so we need to work together with school districts and OSPI. We need to work together with the ECAP Association and school districts to expand capacity. We need to work with childcare providers to make it easier to build and expand and to run their childcares. And so as we look at these budget challenges, I think both Allison and Jenny made the point that we're not cutting services, we're just slowing growth. And what investments we are going to make this year, and and I hope, Senator Wilson, you'll help hold this line, and I believe we all will, is that in order for us to grow any services, we need to make sure it's on a solid foundation. And so rate increases are critical to make sure that childcare providers can hire staff and keep staff, retain staff. We know that some of the most important aspect to high quality early learning is the caregiver to child relationship, and turnover and gaps. It's not healthy or developmentally appropriate for young kids. And so again, having a strong foundation, I think, is critical as we go forward, that is maintained. And so I think as we, again, look forward, expanding with the eligibility that we have, supporting the workforce to make sure it's a solid foundation, are both the kind of primary things that I hope that we can continue to move forward on and really hold the line on. And so I'm looking forward to working with you on that, and the education requirements again for workforce needs. So thank you for that question. And I'd love to know what your priorities are around early learning, and if that's driving as well.
April, do you want to ask the second part of your question that you put in the, or would you like me to read it out?
Can you read it? My dogs are still going crazy.
Okay. So what I asked was part of her question, and then she said she's wondering about the governor's strategy around expanding access to small business employees and how that intersects with the Fair Start implementation and the budget crisis.
Thanks, April. So people may have seen in the governor's budget, he mentioned that he'd like to expand childcare access to those who are working at small businesses. During his inaugural remarks, he talked about his mom, Edith, and her 5 children, and being widowed at a very young age, and going to run the meat packing or meat butcher shop that his dad had worked at, and she took up on that job. And so I think it's really personal for him that small businesses, those who work in small businesses, have access to childcare, so that single mom can work and do that, and obviously contribute to the economy. So I think that's really near and dear to his heart. So I'm looking forward to working with him to see how we can expand childcare, understand the constraints, and also trying to figure out the logistics of all of that. But I know that vision is really based on both his personal experience and his family, and also having traveled around the state during his campaign and hearing from so many around the state about the challenges of accessing childcare. So I think it's a great indication of where his heart is and his investment goals. And I look forward to working with him, expanding access to childcare.
Thank you. And I see Diane, and then I see Lois as well. So we'll go in that.
Yeah, I had a question pertaining to sort of rural communities and some of the impacts on rural communities like Central Washington. I feel that sometimes we are a little bit forgotten about some of the specifics that we face. And in particular, kind of going ahead, I'm thinking about our undocumented citizens and how they might have specific impacts on those families and young children. I also reflect that in Yakima, I suspect we're one of those hot spots that you referred to, because it seems like every time I read the paper, I'm seeing some nefarious acts that our teens are doing. And I think, uh-oh, they're going to go to criminal, or our young adult, emerging adults. And I just wondered what your thoughts were, or what is DCYF thinking about how we can specifically address rural populations in across the state and the specific concerns that they may have.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would be remiss if I pretended to say the agency feels or is focused on, because I don't know yet in 48 hours. And so I will definitely just make myself a note to make sure that I have a better answer on the focus there. I do know that whether it is our Early Learning Facilities Fund, that is the Ruth Kagi Facilities Fund, that there's, lots of intention and work there to help ensure that we have facilities. And then, of course, those need to be staffed. And so that is some critical work that we need to do. Over the interim, right after session, went with the Association of Washington Business up to Canada to look at their childcare system. And one of the things that they were sharing with us is that they have people who go out proactively into communities, identify where the gaps are in for providing childcare, and then they work to identify the locations and a provider to help facilitate and ensure that that access is there. So that has been something that I think I would love for us to explore. Can we have somebody who is proactively going into those communities and working in childcare deserts to identify a location, build coalitions, attract a provider, and ensure, or obviously work with a local provider if there's one there, to really expand that in a deliberate way instead of kind of sitting back and waiting for capacity to build. And that's similar with ECAP, working closely with school districts and the ECAP Association and DCYF to more proactively generate places and providers and schools who can and want to provide ECAP. And instead of just waiting for people to raise their hand. I mentioned that I was on the transition team for Governor Ferguson, and we have and focusing as the chair of a subcommittee on childcare. And we had a couple of number of recommendations. One of them is having a dedicated person proactively going out across the state for that. And obviously rural is very focused. And then one of the ones that also rose to the top was talking about border communities like a Spokane or a Vancouver that have employees from Idaho or Oregon who work at childcares, and making sure that those providers can have access to the new benefit from Senator Wilson's bill that allows workers at childcare to access Working Connections childcare. And just because they live in Oregon or live in Idaho, but they work in Washington, we want to make sure that we're providing childcare and keeping those employees at the critical childcare that we need. So that is definitely something I'm thinking about. Let me also just mention, because you were talking about some undocumented young people, one of the things that I've already asked the leadership team meeting on day -2, when I sat in on a leadership team meeting, was to really look at and have for a goal for this year to talk about Project 2025 and possible impacts around immigration concerns, that we want to make sure that we are protecting our residents, that we are getting our young people stable, that our families feel safe, and that they're not shying away from needed services because of fear. And so really looking at across the agency, what can we do to help protect and serve our families all across the state so that they that they feel protected and again, get the services that they need and deserve, without shying away from fear as much as we can. So that is something that where I know that we're going to be focused on this year too.
Thank you.
Lois.
Hi, thank you, Senator Wilson and Secretary Sin. Congratulations. I wanted to come on camera so you could see me speak those words. I want to ask you, and I know you've put some thought into this and knowing how you would not have said yes to this position if you didn't feel like you could affect real change. So I would like to know when you look at the past administration, what goals do you have? And besides what you shared, I'm talking about your heart goals, Secretary Sin, for the administration, as well as for the department, sorry, as well as what your goals are for the first 90 days.
Thank you, Lois. And I have to say, in the years working with me, you've always do ground me on the heart and not just the head. So I really appreciate that. We were forming the department, and as we were moving forward, we talked so much about culture change. And we had kind of the pandemic get thrown into the middle of our efforts right at a time when JR had just come on board and we had just really become an agency, a complete agency. And I think we were in recovery mode. We were in quick address the pandemic mode and then in recovery mode post pandemic. And so I'm hoping that we look forward to working to really focusing back on that culture change where people feel supported. They feel like we're part of a team, that we are really focused on culturally relevant, trauma-informed, but effective and available and necessary and needed services. And that it is instead of thinking of DCYF as, ooh, that's a really tough agency, which everybody is saying to me, which is very true, I know. But also, wow, that their first thought is, wow, what an amazing place to work and an amazing opportunity to impact lives. And that's right now definitely something people say, but the second thing that they say. And so, I'm really hoping that my leadership style, my focus, our ability to move forward, not during a pandemic, will allow us to do that. And we've had so much change with whether it's Fair Start, our child welfare changes, our reduction in juvenile crime, and now a slight increase in our JR to 25 legislation, that there's been a lot of churn and change. And I'm hoping that the next few years we can have a little bit more of a equilibrium where we really internalize all of those laws, that we're able to train, to reflect, to implement with fidelity, all the way down. Because really, DCYF is made up of people, and legislation is a blunt instrument. And so when we pass pieces of legislation, it doesn't just make things so. We need to really explain to people why that is so. We need to do training and education. We need to understand how it's implemented on the ground in the field. And sometimes I think the agency hasn't had a chance or time to do that. So really focusing on making sure people understand the why, that they understand the law, and that they're on the team together. So that's kind of where my heart is on what I'm hoping to see. And I think it will be measurable ultimately. And I know we're a very data-focused agency. And there's also something that's just that feeling. And I'm hoping that we can really impact that as well. I think you asked the second part, and maybe I combined them, but maybe I missed the second part. But I think that's really where some of my heart is.
Yeah, thank you for that. The second part was just about your goals for the first 90 days.
Thank you.
But if that is part of it, that'll be amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yeah, I mean, I have asked the leadership team in all the different agencies, all the different areas within the group to, share with me how they would like me to understand their work and where I should go and dive deep in. And so I plan on being in Olympia as needed, because it's legislative session. We have cabinet meetings and leadership team meetings and all hands. But this job is not about being in the office. This job is about visiting our locations, meeting with our providers, understanding the regional office dynamics, meeting with our partners. When I go to different cities, I plan on meeting with the local news, with the chambers, with the school districts, with the providers, with the courts, because we are all working together for these kids and families. And I want to know who to call in those areas. I want people to know that I'm thinking about these issues holistically. And so as I go out into the field and the community, in particular around the next 90 days, but I know ongoing, that will also be my vision, is to understand the community, not just understand the DCYF services.
Thank you.
Other wonders, other questions, great conversation, and thanks for letting us put you on the spot in hour 48, if you will. So not that you haven't been thinking about this for a lifetime, so that's clear as well.
Senator Wilson, no, it's such an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I was hoping to see more of you. I walked over from DCY offices here to the Helen Summers building, and I was hoping to be able to hug many of you and say hello in person. This is, I'm still forgetting that we are very much a board made up of people all over the state, which is critical, and I'm glad we can be a hybrid and meet. But it's really been great, and it was definitely like, heck yeah, it's my day too, but this seems to be the place to be. So right. I wasn't going to miss it.
Hear, hear. I see Bobby clapping, and I'd say if we were in person, we would be doing the same thing. So just really, really proud to have you there and to know that you come with such deep knowledge, not only about the work of this board, but the creation of the department, the agency, and just kind of the history and our long body of work. That I know started way before me. And, it's an honor to continue it on all sides, I think. So I think we're well covered in the state of Washington, and I hope people feel that way as well.
Thank you.
And I would say before I turn it over and we move forward, I want to just we still have a little bit of time. So if anybody has anything, don't hold back. We got the secretary.
While the last person is thinking about what they might want to ask or say, I'll just say that when there was an article in the Times about, a possible secretary from Oregon who's in philanthropy or from somewhere else doing a national search, I was like thinking through, a national search, 5 or 6 months, getting that person on board, figuring out, Washington State. And I was kind of like, hell no. I was like, kids and families in Washington can't wait a year. And so, I dove in, and so I said yes. And I'm really excited about this work. And I do have a lot of passion and experience in this area, but I'm also not pretending that I know everything. So please know that I recognize that I still have, so much to learn, especially about operations and implementation. And I look forward to learning. And if I miss something, I know, and I expect, and I hope that you'll call me out and invite me in mainly first, at least to make sure that I do understand more what's going on or give you my perspective. So I know, again, that humble enough to know that there's plenty that I don't know. but looking very forward to learning it all and having continuous learning.
Awesome. I'm doing the teacher wait just in case. And I'm not sure if you're going to run or whether you're going to sit with us for a bit of time, but I know, and I'm assuming you are open for, as you said, questions. And we might want to make sure that everyone knows your new email address and your new contact information, because I know that will bounce back if we use what we have had in our contacts. So maybe that's something we can make sure that members of the board have today before the end of the day, just so folks can follow up. And again, just deepest appreciation for being here on such short timeline. And I have to say, as Human Services Chair, I have new secretaries in every agency. And so anytime we have an opportunity to have a conversation and meet with folks, whether it's in committee or outside of committee, it really will help us as we move forward as a state. And to have others hear your vision as well will help us as we think about how every corner of the state can be engaged in the work that we're doing to make sure that kids and families have everything that they need when they need it, and how they need it. So really thankful for that.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. And I know that I will see you at a confirmation hearing coming up. And yes, please do reach out. Lisha and Nicholas have my contact information. And I look forward to connecting with many of you very, very soon.
Excellent. With that, we're a little ahead, but I'm going to, I think, pass it over to Lisha, because I think you are next on the agenda, if I am not mistaken, because yes, I do have my agenda up. Finally, you think about it, takes a while. Woo! So with that, thank you. And I just, again, thanks so much, Secretary Sen, for spending time with us. She's getting her hugs there from the folks who are in the room. That's good to see.
As she should be. Thank you so much, Senator Wilson. And again, thank you again to Secretary Sen. Just such an honor that you're here and prioritizing the board on day 2. So I am going to talk a little bit today about some 2025 DCYF Oversight Board priorities. And these are some priorities that I've summarized based on 3 main sources. And before I kind of share my slides, which Nicholas will be presenting for me, thank you, Nicholas, I just want to acknowledge that we are past hour 3. And, it's been a little bit, of a longer meeting, but I think this is going to be some really exciting stuff. And I think, I'm sharing this information, but I also want people to know that this is a discussion. So I'll do some summarizing, but I most certainly want to hear from the board as nothing is finalized. So in thinking about the 2025 priorities for the board, the sources really were using the retreat from October and the priorities that came out of that at our board retreat. And then also what areas that were identified as aims and priorities in our annual report. And then finally, members completed, we had a great participation rate. I think we had 79% of members complete a survey in December about their priorities. And with that, I kind of pulled some of the data together. It's not perfect, which is why I'm glad we're having a discussion today. But I just wanted to walk through some of the things that have truly, truly come to the top. And so the first slide is really looking at, and thank you, Nicholas, 2025 priorities that are really board focused. So something that we've already started doing, which is building stronger relationships with DCYF, its new leadership, and the governor's office. That was clear, particularly in the retreat. And that's something that everyone prioritized. Those relationships are very, very key. Another thing that always comes to the top, and rightly so, is to continue and monitor and address disparities across DCYF programs that limit opportunities and success for children and youth and young adults. I know that's something that the agency prioritized. I know it's something that we prioritize as a board. So wonderful to see that reflected in our conversations this past August. The next priority that I want to draw your attention to is bullet 3. Track the trends for outcomes identified in the 2024 annual report as needing improvement to determine whether or not these areas are actually making progress or if they remain a concern. And I think that's something that, we sometimes get, a crisis may happen and we need to direct our attention one way or another way, but really trying to maybe, dedicate certain meetings to various topical areas where we did see concern and, did identify needs for improvement. So really kind of making sure that we're systematic in how we go about topics for our meetings. Prioritizing monitoring adolescent outcomes, all adolescent outcomes, and then given DCYF's continued implementation of juvenile rehabilitation to 25 and reentry supports. And then something that we've talked a little bit about today during this meeting is review the implementation and early impacts of recent reforms to JR facilities. So, better understanding of, we heard about Green Hill in August, but what is currently happening at Green Hill? I know some of that information is provided on a dashboard, which is updated fairly regularly on DCYF's website, but, how do we unpack some of the things that we're seeing on that dashboard? It gives us a nice overview, but what really is happening and how are they ensuring that we don't have the crowding that occurs or, doing that planning. And then I want to highlight the child welfare workforce well-being pilot report using existing data. And this really comes full circle to what Secretary Sen was saying about support. So supporting staff across all areas. We prioritized at the August meeting child welfare workers and really looking at, how do we create something that is not a tome like the annual report, something that is accessible for legislators, something that is meaningful and something that we can produce that can affect change. And this would be a pilot. So we wouldn't be doing this with just child welfare workers and well-being. And we know that really matters for children, youth, and family outcomes. But, as a first mini report or brief, as you would. And then DEI, diversity, equity, and then belonging as well, training and review of the board's shared values. That most certainly is a priority. And then, I think in my initial meetings with all the board members about 5 months ago, something that came up is really wanting to make sure that people felt like they were able to contribute meaningfully to the board and really be engaged. And I think one mechanism for that is through ad hoc subcommittees. So maybe not a standing subcommittee, but, a subcommittee that has a very specific purpose and is time delimited. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a couple minutes. But before I go to my next slide, are there any questions, thoughts, concerns, additions, wonderings? Okay, Nicholas, if you could please move us to the next slide. And then we have some priorities that were identified at the retreat that are much more staff focused. And when I say staff focused, I mean, really me and Nicholas and some of the work we'll be doing. So with assistance. So continuing to recruit new board members to fill vacancies. Part of that process is we take recommendations from folks on the board and reach out. We have flyers and recruitums that we send, and we do cast a broad net, and that's something that I see is really critical to this work. We currently have 6 open spots on the board. 2 will be appointed very soon, but there will be 6 that we need to fill, and 3 of those are lived expert roles, and I think that's particularly critical to know that 3 of the 50% are for individuals with lived expertise. So our American Indian partners with experience in child welfare or juvenile justice on the east side of the state, on the west side of the state, and then a young adult who has experience with juvenile justice or juvenile rehabilitation. Developing a communication dissemination process. So that is something that has come up a lot. We have public comment, and what happens after people present. We focus at the system level. We are not OFCO. We can't, really investigate individual cases. That's not our purview. But what does happen? And I think there's an interest for people to know and to really have a clear pathway about that. And I think this idea in particular could absolutely be fleshed out more, but it's just kind of the beginnings of something that people value and really want to see, public comment, like where are we going with it, and just understanding what happens. So more of a tracking device. And then strengthening onboarding processes. Nicholas and I have a presentation. We did 2 orientation presentations yesterday for Senator Christian and for April Messenger. And, not only that, it's so important to me to empower board members, especially some of our members who do bring lived expertise, to make sure that they are operating on the board not as a rubber stamp, but they are able to meaningfully contribute and have the resources that they need to do so. And then also like some of the meet and greets that we've been doing, making sure people feel comfortable. And we have had quite an influx of new board members. And, something that I am thinking about is, I think it makes sense for us to get together before October and really, have a chance to be face to face, because that was just so helpful having that retreat in October. And then website refresh. It's time. Nicholas will be kind of leading this effort, but that is something that we really want to draw people to the website, have it be more engaging, have it like, our annual report front and center, really make people say, what is this? What do they do? What are they about? What have they done? So really increase that engagement. And we also talked about at the retreat, some social media mechanisms and that sort of thing. But I think starting with the website refresh is a good place. So and then one other thing that came up during our that came up today was just stakeholder engagement, and that is one of our work activities that is defined in the statute, and then that is something I asked about in the survey that went out. So really thinking about how that might happen either in the ad hoc subcommittees or how we can be involved in really having face-to-face interactions with people on the ground. So I see a hand is raised.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm just kind of curious if there's funding available for that website redesign, or is that going to be in-house, or what exactly is the process? Can you enlighten me?
That is a great question, Senator Christian. So that will be in-house. Nicholas has some of those skills, but he also partners with someone in IT. I do not know if that is a service we pay for. I think that's a really important question given the context of budget freezes. So I think it's really a timely one. Nicholas, I don't know if you're able to, to jump in there and say, do we pay for those IT services for, more substantial website changes?
I do not believe we do. It's part of our website maintenance that we already do with DES, Department of Enterprise Services. So I'll just be working with my contact there to make it look more modern.
Great, and engaging and interesting, and catch your attention. Something we're doing a little bit more is having more pictures and having more of that people people focus, and maybe having some of our pictures. So the next slide, which I don't think we need to go to, but I did want to highlight just in case some people were curious, just the 6 areas that from the annual report that were identified as areas needing improvement. And one of those is, JR outcomes for youth involved in the juvenile rehabilitation, juvenile justice system. So really focusing on those as some of our topical areas as we meet throughout the year. And as I shared, I think early on or via email, we currently have bi-monthly meetings set up. So that's 6 meetings a year. However, as needed, we can absolutely meet on those off months. And so I'll be talking about a meeting that is tentatively planned for next month in February, when I move to my kind of next area of discussion. So what do people think? What are some thoughts, concerns? What is missing? So I should say that as a researcher, I did a lot of focus groups, so I'm very comfortable with silence. But I see Justice Bridge has her hand up. Hello, yes.
Yeah, before the plane gets back. I just think it's excellent. I think it's really, I think, the only person who wasn't able to come to the retreat, but after reviewing the write-up and talking to you, I think this so capsulizes it. And the kind of consensus that was able to be developed there. Apparently, too, it meshes with the survey outcomes. So I think we do have consensus, and you have done well in bringing it all together and looking at what our priorities ought to be and the actions going forward. So bravo.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Other feedback, questions, clarifications? Yes, Ruth.
Well, I agree with Justice Bridge, and I think one of the things that really came out of our retreat was the need to focus. And I think, the way you've laid this out, it really does provide that framework, and really appreciate the work you've done.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I really appreciate that. Thank you. It's a team effort. Other thoughts, feedback, questions? Well,
I guess, Laisha, I would just jump in and just say, does this resonate with the newer folks on the board, or do they have specific questions? Because I know, I remember when I first started in the board, it probably took me 1 to 2 years to feel like I was really getting my head around what was going on. But I wonder if we could get some feedback from some of our newer members just to see, does this sort of make sense, or do you have any questions?
That's a great idea, Diane. Thank you. I would love to hear from our new members because they weren't able to participate, obviously, in October, or fill in the survey or be a part of the annual report process. Hi, April.
Hi, I'll just say I don't have any questions. Leisha and Nicholas did a great job onboarding and kind of catching me up to speed on some of this stuff as well. As I've followed this oversight board since its inception. So it's really great to see these priorities outlined, and I'm looking forward to being a part of it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll just say, I'm on day 4 of a brand new package of bill ideas in the world. So before, I've been very focused on state government and budgetary issues and veterans issues. So this is a brand new world for me. I'm down on day 4, so I wouldn't even know what to expect at the moment. But so far, I've been liking what I see.
Yep. it's a lot. I can't even imagine. And there will be lots of time to, we have to focus, but we also have to be nimble. So yes, there'll definitely be time for feedback and questions. Thank you, Senator Christian. Other new members.
Although the priorities make perfect sense to me, I'm wondering about several of them, how they're going to be implemented. And so I need to give some serious thought to them.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. And I really see that as the next steps. Once we have these priorities, well, what is the work plan? How are we going to get there? And how do we get there? Similar to what I was saying, when we live in a somewhat reactionary environment where real issues come up and they deserve attention and they deserve the attention of the oversight board, but how do we maintain some of these priorities throughout the year? So I do plan to share a work plan, because I think implementation is so important. I mean, it's great to have these lofty goals, but we only have so much time, and maybe we need to even prioritize further. So just really appreciate that comment. And I can't see on my screen. I'm not sure if Pamela is still here.
Oh, I'm here. I was thinking if I had any questions, but I don't think I have any at the moment. I think Marion was able to, I was kind of more on the lines of what Marion was thinking about that. So, I mean, if I do have any questions, I know who to reach out to, you and Nicholas, but I think that these priorities are great, and more so of like my worry is like, how are we going to do this within the 2025 priorities, so the year. So yeah, I don't have any questions right now, and no further comments.
But I think both you and Dr. Harris are raising this great point, which is this is a lot, and how do we streamline? So this child welfare well-being pilot report, I'm just giving some thoughts about that. And one of the things that I've talked to the co-chairs about is that we have some existing data through the Washington State Employee Staff Engagement Survey, and it does drill down to DCYF, and we have those data from 2023 and 2024, kind of looking at their engagement and their experience in the workforce. And, that could be a really great baseline for, the upcoming survey in 2025. So, like, how do we be as efficient with quite honestly somewhat limited resources? But yeah, I think that's something that needs to be thought about, because it's a lot, and we can't do everything. So thank you for that. Okay, well, any last comments or questions? You all know how to find me. If not, I'll move on to my next area that I wanted to discuss, which I do not have slides for. Great. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for the feedback. I really appreciate it. And sometimes it's easier to shoot an email and send feedback that way, and that's absolutely fine too. Or, pick up the phone. I have lots of members who call me, and that's great too. I love chatting on the phone. So the next on our agenda, I'm just looking at our time. It's 12:13. We are right on time. I wanted to talk about ad hoc subcommittees and really, as I was saying, as a mechanism for engagement with the work. And two have really risen to the top. And I don't think there will be the two for the year, but since we're really looking at these, at least I'm conceptualizing these as being more time delimited. I think one goal would be to have no more than 2 subcommittees at a time, but not have them be, these are the subcommittees for 2025. And the first one that I'll talk about, actually, I'm going to flip them and talk a little bit about the annual report. So we just went through the annual report, which was super, as you people know, very labor intensive for staff, and a little bit broad brush. something that we do when we are working with the data group, the Office of Innovation, Alignment, and Accountability at DCYF, is we have performance indicators, and we try to find as much of that data online as possible so that when we go to DCYF, we're really trying to reduce their burden in terms of what our asks are as it relates to the data. So Director Sarah Veal, who is Director of OIAA, has shared with us that it's not possible to support the annual report in the manner that it has been done in the past. And that's primarily due to timing and budget cuts. So the timing of our report is a little bit before when they do a lot of their annual snapshots of the data. It's a couple months before, and so they're doing somewhat duplicative work. So that is a concern. At the same time, Dr. Veal is very interested in working with us and partnering with us and figuring out, how to make this work, and has volunteered at least 3 times to come and talk to the board. So that's something I'm thinking about, but really thinking about what is the annual report. Something that a member said is like, are we really looking at the right outcomes? Because we have these stated outcomes and these performance indicators, but the performance indicators, the 18 of them, aren't necessarily in statute. Those stated outcomes are. So, how do we perhaps better align our outcomes that we look at with outcomes that the agency is already looking at? Another concern that I wanted to just back up to, and please ask me to clarify if this doesn't make sense. So part of Dr. Veal's concern about supporting the annual report is that they will continue to have these dashboards. However, they will not prioritize updating them just so we can have it in our annual report. So some of the dashboards will absolutely be current and will be for 2025. However, some will not. It will just include 2024 data. So the way that the report has been conceptualized so far has been really looking at changes between fiscal years. And so something will need to change on that front, because some of the data that was presented in the most recent report would be duplicative, if that makes sense. And, I'm just looking at my notes here. I think we're all on board with data is critical to monitoring our function on the board, our monitoring processes. It was great to hear Secretary Sen say she's thrilled to work closer with us on data. I think that makes me happy. I think that makes lots of people happy, but it makes me particularly happy. So I think working with a smaller kind of ad hoc group on this, like to maybe perhaps reconceptualize what the annual report is, what it looks like, I think would be really helpful. And I know there are some people who care really passionately about, well, everyone cares passionately about outcomes, but there are some people who kind of like getting in the nitty gritty of it all. And so just curious if anyone feels like they would be interested in volunteering for something like this. Could be no more than 3 meetings, but just really to kind of kick off this work. And it may seem early, but it's not. The annual report will be here before we know it, and the time to really think through and partner with Dr. Veal and the data group at DCYF is really now. So,
Elisha, can I jump in just a little bit to help frame a little bit too? Is this kind of came out of discussions with so the OIAA and Sarah Veal, the director, but it also was in looking at the amount of work that Elisha and Nicholas kind of put into this final report. It's pretty odious, honestly. And the question for the ad hoc committee would be to really think about this final report. What do we want it for? What do we want to convey with the report? And can we simplify so that it's not, and try not to duplicate what might be available in other places. So those kind of the idea of just really looking at what do we want to convey with this report, and how do we want to do that? And is there a simpler way to get at the information? And is the information correct? I think actually, Ben, you're the one who has said, are we really looking at the right things? So this would be for those people in the audience here that have a little bit of an interest in kind of doing a little bit more of a deep dive and trying to look at this issue and creating a little bit of a subcommittee to look at that.
Thanks for that context, Diane. That's very, very helpful. So thank you. And I know I'm kind of talking about this for the first time today, and you know, even though it's something that the co-chairs and I have been thinking about. So I'm, you know, obviously, if no one's like running with their hand waving in the air, you know, I will be sending out a ask for volunteers. You know, probably within a week. And so there will be an opportunity and kind of maybe fleshing out, you know, what some of the, you know, main goals would be. And I know Sarah, Director Veal, would be happy to come and talk to this, not only to the larger board, but also most certainly get a little more into the weeds with the subcommittee for the annual report. And so
volunteer for the subcommittee.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Marion. I'm thrilled.
Sure.
Nicholas, can you put a hand up there for me? Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. I believe I see Pamela.
I assume you're asking for volunteers now. Is that right?
I am asking for volunteers now.
Okay, well, yes. I volunteer then.
Thank you so much, Ben. And Pamela, I just want to make sure you're volunteering. I don't know if you have a question, so feel free to come off mute.
Yeah, I will volunteer as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pamela. This is great. Just I know how busy everyone is, so I just really appreciate people taking the time. And Ruth, yes. Question or volunteering?
Question. When we did have our retreat, one of the priorities that you have identified was the child welfare workforce. And I just want to mention that I'm very interested in looking at the data around that and doing some work with whoever else is interested to really try to identify I know that Secretary Sen is going to be spending a lot of time out in the field talking to staff, but to me, that's kind of the heart of how we improve services, is making sure that the staff are really supported and finding out, you know, what we could do to help with that.
I really agree with you. And when I discussed these subcommittees with the co-chairs, I had 3 subcommittees on my list, one of which was child welfare, worker well-being, because that absolutely rose to the top and is exactly, you know, we're on the same page, is critical for outcomes. You know, that is the mechanism for where we're going to get the outcomes that really, you know, where we can have change. Noted. And we'll see if what we can do. But it's great to hear that that's something that you would be interested in volunteering for. And I think
that one of the reasons why we held off, Ruth, was that the data that we want to use as baseline was not available yet for 2024. So we were thinking maybe what we would do is kind of wait until that data was available and then spring that particular subcommittee.
Okay.
Danielle.
Yeah, so I would definitely be interested in that subcommittee, but just for folks to know, the retention survey, I do believe, is finalized, and the results have come out or should be rolling out soon, if I'm remembering correctly. And that kind of ties into that subcommittee.
Yes. So I've been working with an HR person at DCYF, and the 2024 data was released at least to leadership this past week, and I didn't share that. So they do have the 2024 data. But I think we would probably look at it more as baseline for 2025, but this is something that the subcommittee would discuss. Yes, Bobby.
So what's the third subcommittee?
That is a great question. Thank you. That was beautiful timing for that transition. So really looking at JR involved youth and really having a dedicated focus on outcomes for them. We had that presentation on Green Hill in August, and then we had some DCYF people, leadership staff answer some questions, but where are we going with that? Like, are we monitoring that?
You had me at JR involved youth.
Wonderful. Such a need. And I'm noticing the time. So I think
that's why I'm trying to move it along too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bobby. Anyone else who might be interested in a JR outcome focused subcommittee? Okay. Well, I will be sending a call.
Recruit.
I will be recruiting. So with that, I just want to thank you all for the time today. And I want to just turn it over to Senator Wilson.
Well, I too want to thank you, and I'm not volunteering because it really just depends on the when. So all of the topics you talked about are critically important to me, and I know Senator Christian as well. And I think we're happy that folks on the board are interested and also will be willing to help us inform, I think, the work as we move forward as a committee and as a legislature. So perspectives from all sides are critically important to make things better for kids and families across our state, especially those that are in our state care, and particularly our vulnerable young people. So just really appreciated. And just deepest appreciation for the conversation today and the interest that every single person on this Zoom screen and in that room really took. And we are in kind of a scary space and a place right now as we're moving ahead and hearing about not having money and having an experience with austerity budgets in the past, and really fearful of people losing supports that we know are critical when we think about food, shelter, and clothing and all of those things. So to have everyone hang during that conversation and still be on and be willing to work and help us to the other side is just really, really so important. And I think that's the value of this group. So I just want to humbly say thank you so much. And thanks for letting me not lead with grace this morning as I walked in and realized I had no agenda up, and I was madly trying to find the agenda and not knowing who was going and what I was introducing. So Co-Chair Levy, I am just going to say thank you very much, and I will say thanks to the group and pass it on to you for your goodbye. But it does in fact take a team, and I want to thank Nicholas and Lisha too for all the work that you're doing, and thank you, and thanks to all folks on and in the meeting today.
Thanks, everyone. I think that means we can leave, right, Lisha? Okay. Bye
We
now.
can adjourn. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.